Well, we now have an announcement from the White House. Definitely the president was not hit when the shots were fired at him, apparently at him, after he left the Washington Hilton this afternoon. More and more information is coming in. It's coming in sketchily, necessarily. As you can imagine, the scene was rather chaotic outside the Washington Hilton when the shots were fired. It appears that they were fired by a white man, a sandy-haired man who may have been in his late 30s or early 40s, that he fired 5 shots, and he may very well have hit 3 people. The Secret Service says a Secret Service agent was wounded. A Washington City policeman was wounded. There was an earlier report that the president's press secretary, James Brady, had been wounded. We have had no confirmation of that. But to repeat, President Reagan was not hit by the gunfire outside the Washington Hilton this afternoon. The president was leaving the hotel after speaking to an AFL-CIO meeting, specifically the National Conference of the Building and Construction Trades Department. The president turned. He looked in the direction from which the shots were fired. There was, so we're told, a frightened expression on his face, which is surely understandable. The Secret Service men shouted for him to get into his limousine, and then they tackled the man they thought had done the firing, wrestled him to the ground. There was a scene of considerable violence, guns drawn by the Secret Service men in the act of protecting the president and capturing the man who apparently did the firing. There has not as yet been any statement by Mr. Reagan himself, but to repeat, he was not injured. What, if any, motive the assailant had, we have not been told. We don't know his name. We don't know quite what he was doing there, how he managed to be in the area from which he did the firing. All of this information, we trust, will come in as the afternoon goes along. Again, to repeat, 3 men were wounded. One was a Washington policeman. One was a Secret Service agent. The third we don't know about. There was an earlier report that it was the president's press secretary, James Brady. No statement as yet from the White House beyond the fact that the president was not hit. One assumes that security arrangements are about as tight as they can be when the president goes anywhere, but it's hard to resist the impression now that they will become even tighter. Mr. Reagan had just walked out of the building on the Florida Avenue side of the Washington Hilton. The assailant, according to this report we have, wire service report, was waiting to the president's left and behind him. And Mr. Reagan turned as the shots were fired. When he did that, the man who did the firing was then on his right side and in back. A number of police officers pinned the man to the ground. Secret Service agents pushed Reagan into his limousine. As I said earlier, a good many guns were drawn. The scene there in Washington while this was happening looked like, from what we've been able to see of a bit of tape of it, an extremely dangerous one. Guns drawn, Secret Service agents shouting, telling people to get back, trying to hold down the man with the gun and get his gun and ensure that the president was not hurt, nor indeed that anybody else was. But again, we have to tell you, 3 people were wounded, one a Secret Service agent, one a policeman, and that is as much as we know about their identities, nor do we know how seriously wounded they may have been. We have no report on the president's own reaction, how badly he may have been shaken by events, but there may be more information now from Washington Bureau and Roger Mudd.
Ed, we have just received in our NBC studios here videotape of the circumstances outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, and I'm trying to find the correct monitor so I can tell you when that picture is going to come up. These are policemen in raincoats waiting for President Reagan to come out. This is the advance guard now of the Secret Service men coming out. Here's President Reagan waving, right arm up in the air. Suddenly, everybody ducks. Mike Beaver's down. Everybody's down. 3 policemen jump on top of the assailant, wrestle him to the ground. Guns are out. Secret Service men and Metropolitan Police have drawn their guns. Absolute pandemonium with one aide after another yelling and screaming. The assailant is surrounded by a good 15 or 20 agents and Metropolitan policemen. The bald-headed man with his head pointing toward the camera has been identified as James Brady. James Brady is conscious, obviously, and he is going to be worked on, being shielded by these Metropolitan Police and Secret Service agents. There's a secretary running across the street, obviously anxious to get out of the line of fire. By this time, any semblance of order has vanished. The president, during this period when the cameras are trained on the assailant, is in the presidential limousine, and that limousine has left already. This is the Washington Hilton, the Orange Coats Metropolitan Police, keeping away the people who obviously want to jump in and help the police, subdue whoever the assailant is. No identification now available of the assailant. Obviously knew the president was going to be there. Everybody facing outward. The early report is that one Secret Service agent, one Metropolitan policeman, and James Brady, presidential press secretary, were wounded. We have no report on the extent of the wounds. The presidential motorcade went to George Washington Hospital. Still is absolute confusion and that terrible sinking feeling that America has lived through so many times in the past, beginning in 1963 and 1968. These are videotape scenes of about 30 minutes ago from the Washington Hilton. President Reagan emerging from his speech to a meeting of the AFL-CIO. Suddenly he is greeted by a quick burst of gunfire from an assailant outside the hotel. The gunfire apparently hits one Metropolitan policeman, one Secret Service man, and this is James Brady, press secretary to the President of the United States. He appears to be hit in the head. Extent of his injuries are not known. Mr. Brady was taken to George Washington Hospital, as were the Secret Service agent and the Metropolitan policeman. The George Washington University Hospital, less than a mile from this hotel. The president has not been hurt at last report, was not even nicked. No bullets apparently even approached his location. And that videotape, the last scene of that videotape, appears to be someone over the prostrate body of James Brady, who is conscious and now at George Washington Hospital. All right, Ed.
Thank you, Roger. I don't know whether you know, but President Reagan, so we are told, has accompanied his press secretary, James Brady, to the hospital where Brady is under treatment. The president himself is said to have received a bump during the excitement. Whether that meant he hit his head getting into the limousine or somebody bumped into him and knocked him against the limousine, we don't know, but apparently it is not serious as far as the president's concerned, a mere bump. But he is at the hospital, George Washington University Hospital, with James Brady, his press secretary, who, to judge by that videotape we saw of the events that took place, appeared to have been hit in the head, appeared to have been wounded in the head. One doesn't like to say definitely that that happened. He could have hit his head as he went down after having been shot somewhere else, and that could account for the blood that was coming from his forehead, but there definitely was blood on the forehead of James Brady, and he appeared to have been rather seriously hit from what we could see. This incident occurred as the president left the Hilton Hotel in Washington by the VIP entrance. He had been speaking to a meeting of the Building and Construction Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. Reporters and cameramen were gathered outside the VIP entrance because they knew that the president would be using it after making the speech, and that is why there is videotape available, graphic scenes, as you've been able to see, of the incident that occurred. As Mr. Reagan came out and headed for his limousine, reporters shouted questions at him, but as they were doing so, the shots rang out. How many shots? Well, according to one report, 5, but that is not confirmed, and it will take some time for us to know that. Also, we do not know how serious the wounds are of the 3 men who were shot during today's apparent attempt on the life of Mr. Reagan, the Secret Service agent, Washington City policeman, and James Brady, the White House press secretary. We now have a report that 4 shots were fired, but again, that is not definite. And we do know, of course, that an arrest has been made. You, in fact, were able to see that on the videotape. We do not have an identification of the man who was taken in. The gunman was tackled by Secret Service agents and the police. He was pinned to the ground as the motorcade drew away. It drew away toward George Washington University Hospital in Washington. More details here. Well, these are details that we've had before. As you were able to see, the scene outside the hotel understandably became one of chaos as many of the law officers, Secret Service and police, rushed for the man who apparently had done the shooting. Some bystanders tried to join in but were pushed back trying to help and perhaps to punish the man who had done the shooting, but their help proved not to be necessary. All we can do now is wait for further details. They're not coming in very quickly, and presumably questioning is now going on of the man who was taken in. What information will come from that, again, we cannot say. We do hope to know shortly the condition of the Secret Service agent, the policeman, and the President's press secretary who were taken to the hospital, all of them shot. I will just repeat as briefly as I can today's events. Shots were fired at President Reagan after he left the Washington Hilton Hotel after speaking to an AFL-CIO luncheon where he had gone to ask for support for his budget cuts. Shots were fired. None of them hit the president. The president was not hurt. 3 men were hurt: Secret Service agent, Washington City policeman, and the president's press secretary, James Brady. Roger Mudd is in Washington, and I think Roger has some information now that I do not. Roger?
Is that the suspect, still unidentified, other than he was a man in his late 30s, early 40s, is in the hands of the Secret Service at what you might imagine is an undisclosed location. No name for the suspect, no identification, no possible motive for the attempted presidential assassination. He opened fire at a distance of about 10 feet, very close range, and as you might imagine, the noise of a small handgun at such close distance sounded, according to witnesses, as firecrackers. The Washington Hospital Center, which is another hospital a little further away from the scene of today's shooting, says it has received 1 D.C. police officer in its emergency ward. No name of the officer has yet been released because his family has not yet been notified. The information from the Washington Hospital Center is that the police officer is in critical condition. We assume, although we do not know, we assume that President Reagan is back at the White House. The minute anything like this happens, the first concern of Secret Service agents is the President of the United States. He was literally thrown into the presidential limousine, and the first thing they do is get the limousine out of there, and that's exactly what happened. They took the president presumably back to the White House, which is the most secure building in Washington. Press Secretary James Brady was apparently taken to George Washington Hospital, and our information is that that President Reagan accompanied Mr. Brady to the GW Hospital, which is about a mile or 2 from the White House. Hi. Now, I can't read the next, which the next report is to repeat what we showed you earlier, which is a video of the events that transpired about 45 minutes ago in front of the Washington Hilton Hotel. These are the police, and this is the Secret Service men preparing to secure the area as President Reagan comes out. Watch carefully, and you'll see Mike Deaver right there. Boom! There goes the quick burst of gunfire. These are Secret Service agents and Metropolitan Police surrounding and wrestling to the ground the assailant, the would-be assassin. To repeat, the President of the United States was not injured, not hurt. Only suffered some loss of dignity when the agents obviously took care of him, got him in the limousine. President Reagan did go to the George Washington University Hospital to be with his press secretary, Jim Brady, who in this little quick burst of gunfire was wounded. An X-ray at the George Washington University Hospital reveals that Mr. Brady suffered a head wound, the extent of the wound not further identified. The assailant, according to the Associated United Press, is a white, blonde male, young, which I think in this case was specified at about late 30s, early 40s. He was shoved into a Metropolitan Police squad car shortly after this incident. Ambulances took Mr. Brady to the GW University Hospital. In a case like this, agents literally do not know what to expect next. All they know is that they have heard gunfire, and the President of the United States is within the range of that gunfire, and they are literally at the mercy of a sniper or an assailant. You can see machine guns out, burp guns out, handguns out. Every president travels with 3 or 4 large station wagons, Queen Marys they're called, which are literally loaded with an arsenal of Secret Service weapons, and they are now at the ready. This is James Brady, a handgun right at his head, on the pavement. Mr. Brady, we are told, received a head wound. The seriousness of it has not been disclosed. He is obviously under treatment now. An X-ray reveals a head wound. No further report. Both the presidential counselor, Edwin Meese, and the presidential chief of staff, James Baker, are at the hospital with Mr. Baker, or with Mr. Brady, rather. These are Secret Service agents, obviously do not want the press looking in. The next rule is keep the press away in a time of crisis. This is James Brady. Once Mr. Brady was taken by ambulance to George Washington Hospital, and it was determined that the President of the United States was not injured, we are told that the President, in fact, went to GW Hospital. This videotape was taken just outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, where about an hour ago, an assailant, obviously bent on killing the President of the United States, tried but failed. What he did do was, in his quick burst of gunfire, he wounded Presidential Press Secretary James Brady. It is said he wounded a Secret Service agent, and it is known that he wounded a Metropolitan Police officer who is in critical condition. Ed?
One question that I think we have not answered that may have arisen in some minds of the whereabouts of Mrs. Reagan. Mrs. Reagan was not with the President when this happened. She was, we presume, at the White House, but in any case, she was not there. She was in no danger at any time. The President was accompanied by his press secretary, who was wounded, by his Deputy Chief of Staff, Michael Deaver, and by other members of the White House staff. Since the assailant, as I guess we have to call him, was so close to the President when the shots were fired, it does appear to be extremely fortunate, semi-miraculous perhaps, that the President was not hit. It may have been because people were clustered so closely around him and so densely around him. It was raining at the time, not raining hard, but raining. There were a few hundred people standing along the sidewalk as the President came out of the Washington Hilton Hotel, out of the VIP entrance where reporters and cameramen and soundmen had gathered. The people there were waving to the President, cheering him. He was waving back. Reporters were trying to shout questions at him. That's become something of a standard practice in this administration. Reporters shout questions at the president as he goes off in some direction or other, and he often will shout back. He did that during the flap over Secretary of State Haig, for example, last week. But in this case, there was no time for him to answer any questions, so far as we know, because the shots rang out almost immediately. It's hard at a time like this not to think of earlier incidents in our history, recent incidents when this kind of thing happened, when those familiar words appear in the news stories that the shots sounded like firecrackers, that everybody dove to the ground, that people crouched behind cars, that the Secret Service men drew their guns. You will recall that there were 2 attempts on the life of President Ford. One cannot help but think at a time like this of the fate of President Kennedy and the fate of his brother Robert, Senator Kennedy, and of the other American presidents who were in fact assassinated. Happily today, Mr. Reagan escaped. Some explanation of why this came about and the value of any explanation of why this came about, those things remain to be established. I myself, I can't help thinking at a time like this, announced the death of President Kennedy on the air, announced the death of Robert Kennedy on the air, announced the attempted assassination of George Wallace, had a hand in the coverage that followed the shooting of Martin Luther King Jr. And when this kind of thing happens again, one's memory turns back in a melancholy way to certain, to say the least of it, unfortunate events in American life. In any case, happily, none of that has to be said today. The president did escape. He was not injured. We're told he received a bump, but that is something one imagines he will be happy to settle for. There was some pushing and shoving. This statement from the White House Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speaks. There was some pushing and shoving when the president went into the car, but he was not seriously hurt, according to Larry Speaks, the Deputy Press Secretary. Speaks was asked whether the president was hurt at all, and he replied there was a bump. We're told that the president appeared to be stunned. The smile that had crossed his face at the sight and at the greeting of the people, several hundred people gathered outside the Washington Hilton, the smile that had crossed his face as he came out and saw them faded as the shots were fired, as the agents drew their guns, and as he was shoved rather forcefully into his car. As I was saying earlier, Gerald Ford, when he was president, had 2 attempts made against his life. On September 5th, 1975, a woman later identified as Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a member of the Charles Manson cult, was arrested as she pointed a pistol at Mr. Ford. She was subdued and she was convicted. She, I believe, did not get a shot off. 27 days after that, in October of 1975, Mr. Ford escaped unharmed as a shot was fired at him as he was leaving a hotel in San Francisco. The assailant there, Sarah Jane Moore, was seized immediately. She fired 1 shot, and she is still serving a prison sentence in that incident. Mr. Reagan, to repeat, was not hurt beyond a bump that he suffered as he was pushed into his limousine as the shots rang out. As to why he was shoved into his limousine, as Roger Mudd was explaining earlier, that is standard Secret Service practice. It is standard practice by those charged with protecting the life of the President of the United States. And there are times when they are obliged to use force in a measured way to get him out of danger. We are still waiting for a precise report on the condition of James Brady, on the condition of the Washington policeman who was shot, and on the condition of the Secret Service agent who was shot. We do not know the name of the policeman, we don't yet know the name of the agent, and we don't know what their condition is. We do know that James Brady, the press secretary, was hit in the head. His condition we do not know. We're waiting to be told. The president had come out of the hotel and was walking to his limousine, and that's only across a sidewalk. It's a matter of a few feet. And he turned to acknowledge shouts of Mr. President, from the crowd that had gathered there. The shots, as I said earlier, were fired at close range, which in itself is ominous and dangerous. If somehow the president escaped injury, 3 others did not. The president, as I mentioned earlier, was speaking to an AFL-CIO luncheon. He went there to seek support for his proposed cuts in the budget, support that the AFL-CIO has not, to this point, been inclined to give. What success he had at that luncheon, we don't know. That is a story that is made to appear rather insignificant by what did happen. Let's go back to Washington now and Roger Mudd.
Ed, it's difficult simply just to sort out the amount of confusing evidence that comes into this newsroom. There are reports that there is one Metropolitan policeman is at the Washington Hospital Center where he is said to be in critical condition. We have no definitive report on the injuries of a Secret Service agent. We are told that Presidential Press Secretary James Brady has had an X-ray at the George Washington University Hospital, and that has revealed a head wound. We are told by Ken Bodie, NBC News correspondent at the hospital, that Mrs. Reagan is at the hospital, and she reports that her husband is, quote, all right, all right. She was seen going into George Washington University Hospital to be with Press Secretary James Brady. Also, Presidential Counselor Edwin Meese is there, and the Presidential Chief of Staff, Jim Baker, is there. We do not precisely know the whereabouts of President Reagan. We do know, according to all available information, that President Reagan has not been injured, was not hurt, and that whatever gunfire occurred outside the Washington Hilton Hotel did not in any way injure him. He was not touched by any of this other than he was literally hurled into the presidential limousine, and the limousine pulled away from the scene as quickly as possible. All these limousines, of course, are equipped with very sophisticated communications gear, and when it became apparent that the president was out of danger and the assailant, the Secret Service felt, was a single assailant and did not involve any other assistants or Confederates, the president then, it is reported, went to George Washington University Hospital to be with Mr. Brady. That's the latest report. What is arriving here at NBC first was the tape just outside the Washington Hilton, which showed you the action as the assailant opened fire, and now what we have is what is known as the tape of the travel pool, which is a small group of reporters and a cameraman who follow the president wherever he goes. This is tape showing the absolute confusion and just literal craziness outside the Washington Hilton. This is the assailant is down on the ground. James Brady is down on the ground. That appears to be just an unidentified person, perhaps a Secret Service agent. This is the presidential motorcade pulling away, getting away from this scene as quickly as possible. Agents with burp guns, machine guns at the ready. Lots of yelling, lots of confusion, lots of very tight stomachs, sweaty palms, very nervous, not really knowing what's coming next. This tape is less than an hour old from the Washington Hilton Hotel, showing the scene outside this hotel when a lone assailant, who is now in the custody of the Secret Service, opened fire, indiscriminate fire, which did not hit the President of the United States, but did hit the press secretary, James Brady, apparently did hit a Metropolitan policeman and a Secret Service agent. The car carrying President Reagan obviously is gone from this scene. First orders of the Secret Service always are, get him out of there.
Now let's clear the area, please, so we can get a unit in. Right up there.
That's one agent down. You can see the bullet belt around his waist. Next to him is James Brady, and this could be unattended. This could be a plainclothes Metropolitan policeman. Hard to make any further identification other than that.
Come on, fellas, keep the area clear.
Now they're trying to clear the press out in order to open up an avenue for an ambulance or a police car to come in. Virtually every siren in Washington is running during this period. There'll be an all-points bulletin during this period. This appears to be, but that's the assailant, obviously, being treated as a presidential assailant, with the coat over the head, slammed into the police car and taken away. This is still the exterior of the Washington Hilton Hotel. Surrounding streets cordoned off now. This tape is unedited, shot by hard-working cameramen who are shooting everything that moves. Our White House correspondent, Judy Woodruff, can bring in further details. She's at the White House now in the press briefing room. Judy, can you help us?
Roger, yes. I was standing outside the Washington Hilton when the shooting started. We had just come out the door in a big hurry, as the press normally is after the president is leaving the place where he's made a speech and is ready to go back to the White House. We had started to walk toward his limousine to ask him some questions, but we noticed that the Secret Service, that some of the press office agents were rushing us along, and we didn't really get very close. And at about that point, I was probably 1 car length and a half away from the president's limousine when the shots were fired. People immediately hit the ground, and I noticed there were some shots fired from an overhanging, from a sidewalk that was above where the president's car was. I looked immediately to see if I could see the president. I couldn't. I couldn't tell whether he had just been pushed into the car,
Judy,
or whether...
Judy, I'm sorry to interrupt. I beg your pardon. In front of me now are 2 bulletins from AP and United Press International that both say President Reagan was shot in the chest and wounded by a gunman outside the Washington Hotel on Monday. He was reported in stable condition at George Washington University Hospital. I have just read from the United Press International bulletin. The second bulletin is from Associated Press. They both move simultaneously. AP says, quote, President Reagan was wounded in an assassination attempt today, a top White House aide said. He was reported to be conscious. His condition was stable, according to Lynn Nofziger, who is the president's political advisor. Those are bulletins from AP and UP. We were repeatedly assured earlier during the confusion and the wild reporting of rumors and unsubstantiated reports that the president had not been hit. It now, according to AP and UP, is apparent that he was hit. He is in the emergency room at the George Washington Hospital, so that Mrs. Reagan's remarks when she entered the hospital that he's all right, indicate that she was trying to reassure the reporters outside that while he had been wounded, he was not seriously wounded. Those determinations will come to us in a few moments when obviously the press will lay siege to George Washington University Hospital, and there will be further reports on the president's condition. To repeat these 2 bulletins, both from UP and AP, President Reagan was shot in the chest and wounded by a gunman here in Washington today. Ed?
Roger, I just want to explain to our viewers that the earlier information that President Reagan was not wounded, that the president had not been hit, was White House information, that it was the information on which we had to rely, and that we were told that the president had gone to the hospital because he was accompanying his press secretary, James Brady, who was wounded in the head. We now have bulletins from all 3 wire services, Associated Press, United Press, and Reuters, saying that the president was shot and wounded in the left side of his chest, but that he is reported to be conscious and in stable condition in the hospital. This information comes from Lynn Nofziger, who is a presidential aide. Earlier information had come from other presidential spokesmen to the effect that the president was not wounded. So the latest information we have is that President Reagan was hit outside the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington this afternoon, that he was wounded in the left side of his chest. We're told by Lynn Nofziger, who is a presidential aide, who had a big hand in the campaign, you may remember, that the president is said to be conscious and in stable condition. Earlier reports that we carried were that the president had gone to the hospital, but only to see about the condition of his press aide, his press secretary for the White House, James Brady. We had also been told that the president had suffered a bump as he was pushed into his limousine. But that was all. Now, whether this was simply incomplete information that was being put out by the White House because it was all it had, or whether it was because they wanted to see indeed what the president's condition was before making any statement about it, we do not know. But to repeat, we have to withdraw the earlier statements we made that President Reagan was not hit by the gunman who opened fire after lunch today outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. Evidently, he was hit. He was hit on the left side of the chest. Here is a statement from Lynn Nofziger. I can confirm that the president was shot once in the left side. A bullet entered his left side. He is in stable condition and conscious, and Mrs. Reagan is at his side. That statement from Lynn Nofziger. Originally, as we told you, the White House had said Mr. Reagan was not hit when the gunman fired 4, 5, or 6 shots. We have varying reports on that at him as he emerged from the Washington Hilton Hotel. 3 men, we were told, had been hit: a policeman, a Secret Service agent, and James Brady, the White House press secretary. Incidentally, we're waiting for word, specific word on the condition of all of them. From all we know, all were wounded, none is dead. But now we're told that the president was hit. Mr. Reagan was speaking to a meeting of the Building and Construction Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, the Washington Hilton Hotel. He came out of the hotel, the Florida Avenue side. The gunman apparently was within a matter of 10 or so feet from him. And perhaps would have been a miracle if the president had not been hit. Roger, are you there?
Here, Ed, and I think probably the best thing, rather than sit here and try to pretend that I know exactly what's going on, I think the best thing is to read to you the Associated Press account, which pulls together all the disparate elements that we've all been talking about informally. This is the AP account. If I can read it quickly to you, it should bring it all into some sort of a cohesive perspective. Several shots were fired at President Reagan as he left a Washington downtown hotel today. The president was injured. His press secretary, James Brady, was wounded. The Secret Service said a white male was arrested after 6 shots were fired. Brady was rushed to George Washington University Hospital. Secret Service agents shoved the president into his armored limousine, which sped away from the Washington Hilton Hotel. A television cameraman who was near the alleged assailant said he, quote, just opened up and started firing, and that 1 shot hit Brady in the forehead. The report does not say that 1 shot hit the president in the left side. The president had delivered a speech to the AFL-CIO's Building Constructions Trades Conference meeting at the Washington Hilton Hotel. Reagan had emerged from the hotel's VIP entrance, and reporters were attempting to shout questions at him when there was a rapid-fire succession of shots. The scene outside the hotel immediately became one of chaos, and we saw that earlier in the videotape we showed you. A crowd gathered. At the White House, Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speake said the president was not hit. We now are told, of course, that he was hit, that he is at George Washington University Hospital, hit in the left side of the chest, condition stable. Larry Speake said that there was some pushing and shoving when the president went into the car, but he was not seriously hurt. Mr. Speakes, of course, was talking from the distance of a mile or two. A videotape of the incident showed Brady lying on the ground several feet from the doorway of the hotel. The cameraman for ABC, Hank Brown, said he saw a white man with blonde hair in his 30s fire at Reagan from a distance of about 10 feet. That's the AP account so far, Ed.
So how do we get the word?
I'm told that we now have a slow-motion version of the videotape of the attack on President Reagan this afternoon, in which, to repeat, the president was wounded. And perhaps we will be able to see more in this slow-motion version that you're looking at now. Perhaps we'll see whether the president, we'll see the president hit. Perhaps we'll get a better look at the man who did the shooting. This, to repeat, is a slow-motion version of the incident this afternoon outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, when we are now told President Reagan was shot in the left side. He is conscious and in stable condition. You need no more comment from me. You can see this as well as I can. This, of course, is the corralling of the man accused, apparently accused, at any rate arrested for doing the shooting. Policemen, Secret Service men holding him down, and incidentally looking around to see whether anybody else might have been involved, because at this stage they could hardly have known whether it was only one man, as it appears to have been. An ABC cameraman who was standing nearby, Hank Brown, said the man fired a .38 caliber revolver, that he did so without saying a word, that he simply opened fire. That was a slow-motion version of the videotape we showed you earlier. The shots fired at President Reagan, the capturing of the man, the capture of the man who's thought to have fired those shots. Let's go back now to Washington and Roger Mudd.
Ed, what we have here now is a very brief glimpse of Mrs. Reagan as she arrived less than an hour ago at George Washington University Hospital. Here's the car pulling up under the emergency marquee at GW Hospital. Agents running out, ordering the press back. There's Mrs. Reagan in the red coat on the double, running into the emergency room. Police have obviously secured the area. The president is in ahead of her. She was not at the hotel this morning when all this happened, but obviously was quickly informed. A separate car brought her to George Washington Hospital, which is about a mile west of the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue at the intersection of 21st Street and Pennsylvania, the George Washington University Hospital. That was Mrs. Reagan. She yelled to reporters as she went in, "He's all right, he's all right." We're now been told, after being assured the president was not hit, that the president indeed was hit, one bullet in the left side of his chest. Ed?
As I was saying earlier, Roger, and this is information one would prefer not to have and not to have to give, this is President Reagan is the 6th president of the United States in this century who has been the target of an assassination attempt. And 2 of the 6, who of course were William McKinley and John F. Kennedy, were killed. All we know about the president so far today is that he was hit in the left side, that he is in stable condition, that he is conscious. We have just been told by Lynn Nofziger, who announced that the president had been hit after earlier reports that he wasn't, that he is not undergoing surgery at this time and that the bullet apparently is still in him. Let's go now to Judy Woodruff at the White House.
Edwin, as I was saying a few minutes ago, those of us who were outside the hotel when the shooting happened couldn't see immediately what had gone on. I did learn a few minutes afterwards from a camera crew who were standing right next to the gunman that he simply raised his arm and opened fire with a handgun in the direction of the president. The crew, who was just a few feet away from the president, didn't believe the president had been hit. The rumor, as you've been saying for the last few minutes, for the last hour, was that he was perhaps nicked on the head as the Secret Service agent pushed him into the car. But no one there on the scene, as far as I could tell, saw that the president was actually hit with a bullet. They did see that the other 3 people were hit. The man who did the shooting, late 20s, early 30s, a white man with reddish blonde hair, standing right next to the press. How he got the permission to be standing there, why he wasn't searched, those are questions we'll of course be asking later of the authorities, but we don't know the answers to those. Those of us in the press were, what word can I use? We were shocked. Suddenly there were shots that rang out. Everyone hit the ground, and I guess we all hit the ground instinctively because there was the smoke in the air from the guns that had been fired. I suppose there were 6, 7, 8 shots fired. And one of those shots, I know at least I believe, came from a Secret Service agent who was stationed overhead near the roof of the hotel. The president's limousine pulled away within 5, 10, 15 seconds of the shooting. He was pushed in. I saw his Deputy Chief of Staff, Mike Deaver, run to the second car behind him, jump in the car, and of course it took off immediately behind the president. At that point, there was still an enormous state of confusion. Reporters were standing there trying to figure out what had happened. We could obviously see that there were 3 people on the ground. Police at that point were still struggling with the gunman. They had him so surrounded that at that point it was hard for us to get a good look at him. He was the first one to be taken away. A police car came up within a matter of minutes. He was dragged away. I think they threw a coat over his head, and he was pushed into the car and taken away. I believe an ambulance came a few minutes later. Jim Brady was put on a stretcher and taken away in the ambulance. As I say, we didn't know at that point what the president's condition was. When I first heard the firing, I looked in the direction of the president because I was about a car length and a half away from where he was, and I couldn't see him. But I did see some agents crouched on the other side of the car, and I assumed that he had been pushed in, but didn't know whether he was in good condition or not. And when I asked some of the Secret Service agents who were still standing after his car pulled away, they said he had not been hurt. So that was the story the White House put out for the first hour or so.
Judy?
Ed, back to you. Or Roger?
Yeah. Can you hear me, Judy?
Yes, I can.
What, do you expect a briefing there in a matter of moments?
I haven't heard. I've been standing here. I haven't gotten word of that.
They're all listening to you on the television down there, aren't they?
I think so.
What Lynn Nofziger has reported is that Mr. Reagan is, quote, not at this time in surgery or headed for surgery. An official apparently at George Washington University Hospital said that Mr. Reagan walked into the hospital. But Nofziger, who is the president's political advisor, said the president apparently did not immediately realize that he had been wounded and that the bullet was still lodged in his chest. Mr. Nofziger said that the president is not at this time in surgery or headed for surgery. Officials said the shots coming on the 70th day of Mr. Reagan's presidency struck the bulletproof limousine, lodging in the side and striking the windshield, leaving a pockmark but not penetrating the glass of the presidential limousine. This is, just making a quick count, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the 5th presidential attempted or successful assassination since 1963. It's something that every American now has recoiled at and lived through and dreaded the thought of another. But beginning in 1963 with the assassination of John Kennedy, there was in 1968 the assassination of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King in 1975. 2 attempts on the life of President Gerald Ford, one by Squeaky Fromm, the other by Sarah Jane Moore, both apprehended and imprisoned, and now in 1981 an attempt on the life of President Ronald Reagan. We quoted earlier the ABC cameraman Hank Brown, who said the gunman outside the hotel simply opened up and kept squeezing the trigger. Vice President George Bush, it is said, was en route from Fort Worth to Austin, Texas to address the state legislature in Austin, and he was ordered to fly back directly to Washington. Now, we have taken from the videotape that we showed you earlier a series of 5 or 6 frozen frames of the videotape, one after the other, showing and freezing in action the scene just outside the hotel. This is the agents and the Metropolitan Police preparing for Mr. Reagan's arrival. Center, there is the figure in the foreground is Mike Deaver. He has her hunch because he has just heard the first shot. This is an agent just springing out of the presidential limousine, looking back toward the gunfire. The man in the trench coat obviously is an agent. Lunging forward, right over the agent's head you can see President Reagan. If I had a pointer I would show you, but there is, you can see clearly President Reagan's face looking toward the gunfire. Deaver is now in the foreground looking to the left. The agent is looking toward Deaver. The agent in the trench coat is looking back toward the gunfire, and the agent beyond him obviously has his gun out and is pointed toward the gunfire. All eyes are pointing to the left edge of the picture. Here is the third shot in sequence. Now President Reagan's head is down, Obviously, the agents are lunging toward him. His head is, there's Reagan, the white circle. You can see the two heads. The one on the right is President Reagan's. He has obviously either slipped down or fallen down or been knocked down by his agents, who are obviously trying to get him down below the line of fire, behind the limousine. This is the fourth picture. Here's the fifth picture. Everybody in a crouch now, down behind the limousine. Doors are open. The back door is wide open, and the president, in a half crouch, surrounded by agents, is being hustled into the back door of the limousine. We now have, if we can see the last picture in this sequence, if there is one more. No, that was the last one. We now have, pardon me, from the Secret Service, an identification of the suspected assailant. The Secret Service, according to reporter Bob Hager, has identified as the assailant John Warnock Hinckley, Jr. John Warnock, spelled W-A-R-N-O-C-K, Hinckley, H-I-N-K-L-E-Y, Jr., of Evergreen, Colorado. 33 years old. This is the videotape outside the hotel, which we have seen before. This is Mr. Hinckley, we are told, being hustled into the squad car Metropolitan Police. Taken from him was a .38 caliber weapon, a revolver. He is being held in the police headquarters, 2nd District Metropolitan Police. "23 years old. My mathematics is not functioning right now. He's 23 years old, born in May 1958, the 29th of May 1958. John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., Evergreen, Colorado, not further identified. He is being held at the 2nd District Police Headquarters, Metropolitan Police Department, identified by the Secret Service, John Warnock Hinckley, Evergreen, Colorado. The stock market immediately closed, according to the wire services from the Senate of the United States. The Majority Leader, Howard Baker, told reporters that President Reagan will undergo surgery for the wound in his upper left chest. Senator Baker ordered the Senate recessed until after the president emerges from surgery. Senator Baker said the White House had told him that the president's condition was serious but stable. Majority Leader Howard Baker also announced that Vice President George Bush was returning to Washington from Texas, which we reported earlier. We now are told that President Reagan will go into surgery at George Washington University Hospital in about 5 minutes. And I can't read the message there, but we should have a progress report in about an hour. I think that's what they expect. It is said to be one bullet lodged in the upper left portion of his chest. His condition is described as stable. Ed Newman?
Wanted into Burbank.
One hesitates to speculate, but it is a matter of interest, a rather startling matter of interest, that President Reagan was able to walk into the hospital with a bullet lodged in his side, and that for a while he did not know that he had been shot, so it appears, and it appears that others did not know he had been shot. Now, whether this suggests that the bullet did not penetrate very far, it would be mere speculation at this time. Obviously, we're trying to find out, and as Roger said, we are awaiting a medical bulletin from the hospital on the president's progress. But it is, at least on the surface, encouraging that the president was able to walk into the hospital and that it appears that he did not know that he had been shot, at least for a while. It's a rather extraordinary event. It will require some medical explanation. We hope to be able to get that for you. We've been told that the New York Stock Exchange has stopped trading. So has the American Stock Exchange, also has stopped trading. Now let's go to the White House and the White House briefing room.
Shot once in the left side this afternoon as he left the hotel. His condition is stable. A decision is now being made whether or not to operate to remove the bullet. The White House and the Vice President are in communication, and the Vice President is now en route to Washington. He is expected to arrive in the city this afternoon. Mrs. Reagan is currently with the President at the hospital. For your background, We anticipate that press statements, additional press statements, will be forthcoming from the hospital site. I'd like to add 2 notes. We have been informed by Jim Baker that the President walked into the hospital. I would also like to inform you that in the building as of the moment are the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, and the Attorney General, as well as other assistants to the President. No, in this building. I'm sorry, we do not. We would like to get that for you as rapidly as possible.
Vice President act as President under these conditions?
No. Because of the delicacy of the situation, we wanted to inform you that the Vice President is on his way back to Washington. I would emphasize once again that the President's condition is stable, and that we were informed by Jim Baker that he did walk into the hospital.
Is he still conscious?
I'm sorry, we simply don't have enough information that is hard at this moment to give you.
Is he conscious, Dave?
I'm sorry, I do not know the information on that, so I'm really not able to respond. Let me say this. Let me just emphasize this for your background.
At about this level right here.
Are obviously closer to this situation on a moment-to-moment basis than we are here. We are obviously in very close communication with them, and we will try to keep you informed here, but that the primary statements we expect will be coming from the hospital, because we feel that they are closer to the facts.
Who is there, Dave?
Well, as of the moment, in addition to Mrs. Reagan, as I've informed you, and others, Mike Deaver, as you know, and Dave Fisher were with the President at the time. 4 people went up together, Ed Meese, Jim Baker, and Larry Speaks and Lynn Nofziger went together to the hospital. Oh, I'm not sure of the time. The time on these events has run together somewhat. But we will try to keep you posted here as well as we can. I think you all understand the delicacy of the situation. I simply don't want to report facts that we're uncertain of as of the moment. This is really to confirm what has been said from the hospital already.
How serious a wound is it?
How
serious is the wound?
I cannot answer either of those questions. We will, as soon as we get additional information, we will obviously try to help you. I think if you will be patient as the situation demands, we will try to get as much information for you as possible.
Dave, is the President under any sedation?
I cannot answer that. I really would like, we wanted to let you know where we were as of the moment. We will try to let you have further information as we can. Thank you very much.
When will the Vice President arrive?
Later this afternoon.
We have just heard from David Gergen, who is the staff director at the White House and who is an assistant to the President. He has told us that a decision is being made at this moment about whether or not there will be surgery on the President. He would not say whether the President was still conscious, still awake, but he did say that the President had walked into the hospital, as we had reported earlier on NBC. Mrs. Reagan is there with him. Vice President Bush is on his way back to Washington from Texas. We were told by Mr. Gergen that despite what has happened, that the President is still the President, that Vice President Bush is not now acting as President. He refused to give us any further details on the condition of the President. He referred us to officials at the hospital who he said were closer to the situation. And we asked him, for example, how serious the wound is. He said the President's in stable condition, but he didn't give us much beyond that. He also said that he did confirm that the President had been shot one time in the left side, but that was as much detail as we have been given. He referred us, we asked about the condition of the President's press secretary, Jim Brady, who we know was shot in the head, in the forehead, at the same time the President was shot, and he said at this point there is no information on Mr. Brady's condition. So I suppose we'll have to look to George Washington Hospital for more information. Ed or Roger?
There is some information on James Brady. White House aide, we're told, said it does not look good. That was his comment when asked about the condition of James Brady, the president's press secretary, who was shot. Brady was seen being wheeled into the CAT scanning room, the CAT scan, which is the most modern of the devices for discovering wounds and other ailments. His head was bandaged. He did not appear to be moving. All we have is a statement by a White House aide. It doesn't look good. A Washington policeman was shot at the same time. As you know, we do not have his name. He is in critical condition. The Secret Service man, and we do not have any information on how seriously he was wounded, the Secret Service man has been tentatively identified as Timothy J. McCarthy. We know he was wounded. Have a bit more information now. He was shot in the chest. Again, we do not know how serious that is. We have a further statement about President Reagan from Lynn Nofziger, his political aide, from whom the information originally came that the president had been shot, after the White House said specifically that he had not been and that he had not been hurt. Nofziger said the president was shot in the left chest. The bullet did not hit the heart. To repeat, Nofziger said the president was shot in the left chest. The bullet did not hit the heart. Nofziger said he is not undergoing surgery at this time. My understanding is that the bullet is still in him. There is a report, and I emphasize that it is a report, that the president's left lung has been collapsed by the bullet that entered his body. Again, that is only a report. There is no official confirmation. That is not a statement that the hospital has made, nor has, so far as we know, any member of the White House staff been willing to say it on the record. I think that Roger Mudd in Washington may have some more to say about this now. Roger?
Ed, despite the fact that President Reagan is in excellent health according to his doctors, it is a matter of concern when anybody age 70 has to go emergency surgery. This does not mean that he's in any sort of danger, but it is always a concern for any man of his age to undergo such a traumatic shock as to be hit in the left chest by a bullet and then wheeled into an emergency room, and so it's a matter of some concern here. His condition is listed as stable. George Washington University Hospital is one of the country's best known and best regarded hospitals. It is a hospital attachment to the University, George Washington University. Outside that hospital is Ken Bodie, who is on duty now. Ken?
Roger, Lynn Nofziger, the president's longtime aide, former press secretary, moments ago made a statement, said the president had been shot, as you know. He was hit in the chest. I was standing outside the x-ray room looking inside when they brought the president's x-rays down. There is indeed a bullet just under the president's rib cage, lodged, showing on the x-ray. He was apparently helped into the hospital, more or less under his own power, but somewhat with the aid of Secret Service men. As the presidential limousine pulled away, there was a hole in the side of the presidential limousine, rear window, right where the president would sit. From my vantage point, I couldn't tell, obviously, whether the president had been shot through that hole or shot at some other point. Nancy Reagan came in through the doors of the emergency room, was led around the corner, and greeted by Secret Service men who said very simply, he's all right, he's going to be okay. Brady's x-ray, Jim Brady, the press secretary's x-ray, looks far more serious than that. There is indeed the hole right in the forehead, as Roger Mudd and Ed Newman told you. There are no reports at this point on Jim Brady's condition from here at the hospital. Also here at the hospital are presidential aides, Jim Baker, Ed Meese, Mike Deaver, and Lynn Nofziger. Senator Paul Laxalt is here on hand as well. None of them had anything to say to us at this point from outside the hospital where we're now standing.
In the earlier briefing we received from David Gergen, who is one of the chiefs of staff, deputy chief of staff of the White House, he emphasized that the president did in fact go in the hospital under his own motor power, helped obviously by concerned agents and assistants, but he emphasized that at the White House now are the Secretaries of State, the Secretary of Treasury, and the Secretary of Defense, and the Attorney General. Those are the four senior members of the cabinet. Obviously trying to make sure that there is no cause for alarm or panic and that the government is under good control. The Vice President is on his way back from Texas, where he was to have addressed the Texas legislature and is due back in this afternoon. In answer to a direct question, will George Bush be acting as president, David Gergen said, no, of course not. He did walk in, and he is conscious and reportedly will be undergoing surgery in a few moments. So we're going to show you once more the shot of the presidential limousine parked outside George Washington University Hospital. That close-up showed you where a bullet hit the rear right window of the presidential limousine. There's the seal that goes with him everywhere he goes, and that would have been the seat that the president occupied. Of course, the president was not in the limousine when the bullet was fired. This was obviously an errant shot. The president was up toward the front of the car on his way to get into the limousine when this exchange of, or not exchange, but a burst of gunfire cracked through on the outside of the Washington Hilton Hotel. Ed Newman?
The question, of course, that now faces this nation is a medical question, which is whether the president is to be operated on, whether he is to be operated on immediately, what is to be done about the bullet that has lodged in him. These medical questions that have to do with the president's condition to be subjected to surgery, to whether an immediate operation is the best course to take to remove the bullet, determination as to whether any other organs may have been injured. We have the specific statement that the president's heart was not hit. We don't know whether that means that perhaps something else was. And as Ken Bodie said, after having seen the x-ray, he was able to see the bullet lodged under the president's rib cage. So very serious medical decisions are now in the process of being made at George Washington University Hospital in Washington, where yet another American president shot is having to have medical treatment. There was an interesting point that was made, a matter of no great importance, but an interesting point, that immediately after Mr. Reagan announced last year that he was a candidate, an announcement he made in Washington, he flew to Florida, and outside a hotel in Hollywood, Florida, a man pulled a toy gun. Mr. Reagan was then hustled into the hotel. The man was arrested. Well, today it was not a toy gun. According to an eyewitness, it was a .38 caliber revolver fired by a man who said nothing whatever, no words, just simply opened fire on the president's party. Hitting it now appears 4 people, firing, according to estimates we've heard, 4, 5, or 6 bullets. The assailant was the man, and he's constantly being called an assailant, was wearing a raincoat, blue shirt, dark trousers, and he simply opened fire. We may have more information now from George Washington University Hospital and NBC News correspondent Chris Wallace.
Ed, we are indeed standing out front of George Washington Hospital in a driving rainstorm now, and people continue to come here to stand out in the rain. Obviously the press, but also bystanders, just to find out what is going on, what the President Reagan's condition is. Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speaks came down just a couple of moments ago to give an update, and we apologize if you already have this information. Obviously, our feeling at this point is to give you as much information as we can. He said that President Reagan is conscious, that his condition is stable, that the bullet is still lodged in his chest. He would not respond to questions about whether or not surgery has been slated for the president, saying that he just didn't know about that yet. He said that the president had talked to Mrs. Reagan for some time. She was not with him at this point, but that they had conversed. He also said that Vice President Bush is out of the city and did not know about whether or not he is planning to return to Washington. One other indication that we're going to be here for a while, Larry Speaks said that a press center will be set up here at the hospital, a formal press center, so that reporters can keep the watch, which certainly will go on into the night and into tomorrow, as to how President Reagan's condition and the condition of Press Secretary Jim Brady progresses. This is Chris Wallace at George Washington Medical Center.
Tom Baker, who is the assistant agent in charge of the Washington office of the FBI, told NBC News a moment ago that there was, in fact, 1 gunman and that he injured 3 people. 4 now. He injured a Washington police officer whose last name is Delahunty, first name unknown. He injured a Secret Service agent, Timothy McCarthy, who was in critical condition. He injured the presidential press secretary, James Brady, and he injured the President of the United States. The name of the assailant is John Warnick Hinckley, Jr., age 23, of Evergreen, Colorado. From him was taken a .38 caliber revolver. He is being held at the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, and he is being questioned by Captain Jimmy Wilson of the Homicide Division of the Metropolitan Police Department. That information comes from Tom Baker, who is the assistant agent in charge of the FBI. We should say, perhaps in defense of Larry Speakes, who put out the early word that the president had not been shot, that from what we gather, Larry Speakes was at the White House when all this was happening, and in the confusion and in the panic of the moment, probably heard that the president had not been hit, because the reports were that he was in a car and on his way out. So in order to reassure people, he said that he had not been hit. It was obviously not a deliberate mistake on his part, but trying to reassure that everything was all right. But now it turns out that the president is injured and it is in stable condition. Ed? Just to bring everyone up to date again, to try to bring it all into one cohesive piece, we will report once more that Ronald Reagan wounded in the left side in an assassination attempt this afternoon. His press secretary and 2 law enforcement officers were shot. President Reagan was conscious and his condition stable, according to Lynn Nofziger, who is the president's political aide. Another White House spokesman, David Gergen, said the president had walked into the hospital and, quote, a decision is now being made as to whether to operate to remove the bullet. ABC News reported that the bullet had punctured a lung. This is unconfirmed. A White House spokesman first said that President Reagan was not hit when a gunman fired 4 to 6 shots at him as he emerged from the Washington Hilton. Nofziger said, I can confirm that the president was shot once in the left side. A bullet entered his left side, said Nofziger. He's in stable condition, conscious. Mrs. Reagan is at his side. Nofziger said the president was shot in the left chest. The bullet did not hit the heart. He is not undergoing surgery at this time, said Nofziger, but he said, my understanding is that the bullet is still in him. The Secret Service said John Warnick Hinckley, Jr., 22, of Evergreen, Colorado, was arrested. Secret Service spokesman Jack Warner said the suspect had fired a .38 caliber revolver. Vice President Bush in Texas for an address to the state legislature headed back to Washington aboard Air Force 2 when he heard of the assassination attempt. A Secret Service agent, Timothy J. McCarthy, was shot in the chest. A city policeman, later identified as Officer Delahunty, was wounded and reported in critical condition at the Washington Hospital Center. A TV cameraman of ABC, Hank Brown, who was near the alleged assailant, said Brady was shot in the forehead. The cameraman said the gunman just opened up and started firing about 10 feet from Reagan. Picture there of Jim Brady on the ground. Hank Brown said he saw a white man with blonde hair in his 30s fire at Reagan from about 10 feet away. He said Brady appeared to have been hit in the head. That's the account as put together by the Associated Press. Ed?
Roger, you were talking about the confusion at the time. I can't help being struck by the fact that we're told now that the man arrested is 22 years old or 23 years old, and you may remember that the ABC cameraman, Hank Brown, said that he was in his late 30s, perhaps early 40s, and Hank Brown is a man who is well able to, who was a trained observer, as far as any of us in the news business are trained observers. He thought the man was in his late 30s or early 40s. He turns out to be 22 or 23. NBC News will have a special report on today's events after tonight's broadcast of the NCAA basketball final. We have a series of pictures, 3 photographs of President Reagan. We have been able to isolate President Reagan's face as he entered the limousine. There's the first one. Now it's for you to judge whether he is in pain, whether he looks as though he has been hit. We're panning down to the second one. Again, it's not easy to tell what that expression means. It doesn't look as though he's merely looking to see what has happened. This one suggests rather more that the president is grimacing in pain. This tends to suggest more than those first two pictures did that the president at this point had been hit, that something has crossed his face that looks very much like pain, almost intense pain. We're speculating now, but you'll also notice that somebody has his arm on the president's left shoulder, or upper left arm, helping him or forcing him into the limousine. But in that picture, the president definitely looked as though he was in some difficulty, much more than he did in the first two, suggesting that, in a way, the bullet that hit him, that struck him on the left side, had begun to take its toll. We are told about Vice President Bush that he left Texas, Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth at 2:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this afternoon, about 5 minutes after he received word that of the shooting. Now, I assume that means he was leaving before he knew that Mr. Reagan had been shot, but within just having heard that the shooting incident had taken place. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram says that an employee of the Secret Service office downtown saw a televised report of the shooting outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, notified the command post at the Hyatt Regency Hotel where Mr. Bush had been speaking. He had by that time left and had headed for the Air Force Base, and the command post then got in touch with Vice President Bush at Carswell Air Force Base, and he was airborne soon after that. So if he left there at 2:43, he should be in Washington in perhaps an hour to an hour and a half. It is being emphasized at the White House that President Reagan is still the president, that there is as yet no question of Vice President Bush becoming the acting president because of what has happened to the president, that is to say that he has been shot. We don't have to tell you, of course, that we're going to stay with this story as long as we ought to and as long as the story warrants, but there will be an NBC special on today's events after tonight's broadcast of the NCAA basketball final. Back to Roger Mugg.
Ed, just to bring everyone up to date, the last official word we had from the White House was that the President of the United States is conscious and is stable, that the single bullet was still in the left side of his chest, and that a decision was to be made as to whether they would operate. It seems some source of mystery as to why they have delayed the decision or have not yet made it, but in any event, David Gergen, the last official briefing we got, said that the decision would soon be made as to whether they would operate. We're now told that at 4 o'clock, which is just in a matter of a second or two, we are to get a press briefing at the White House. In the meantime, we do have a videotape of Assistant White House Press Secretary Larry Speaks at the University of George Washington University Hospital. That tape, which was to have been played, is not yet ready, so we're going to ask Judy Woodruff to bring us up to date and tell us what she knows.
Well, Roger, the information is coming very slowly here at the White House. We do know, of course, what we were told by Staff Director and Assistant to the President, David Gergen, I guess about 15, 20 minutes ago, and that is that there is a bullet that is lodged in the President's left side. A decision is being made now about whether to operate on the President. Mr. Gergen didn't say whether the President was conscious or not, but he did say that according to Chief of Staff Jim Baker, the President walked on his own into the hospital when he arrived there, I guess shortly after 2:30. We are told, as you, I believe, just said a minute ago, that there's no question of the President having turned any responsibilities over to Vice President Bush. Yet we know, of course, that the Vice President is flying back to Washington from Texas, where he was making a speech, but the President is still the President. There's been no transfer of authority. Mr. Gergen also told us that the 4 highest-ranking members of the President's cabinet are now in the White House. Secretary of State Haig, Secretary of Defense Weinberger, Attorney General William French Smith, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Donald Reagan. That presumably is to reassure anyone who is observing that the situation is under control, despite the fact that the President is in a hospital and possibly may undergo surgery. We have been referred for more information in the immediate future on the President's medical condition to George Washington Hospital, where the President's top aides, Edwin Meese, who is the counselor to the President, Jim Baker, who's the Chief of Staff, Mike Deaver, who was with the President at the time of the shooting, who was the Deputy Chief of Staff, and a few others, including Lynn Nofziger, who is the Political Affairs Advisor to the President. They are all gathered at the hospital with Mrs. Reagan, and I did hear a report, as you did a few minutes ago, that she has seen the President and spoken with him. We also, of course, were told that she yelled to reporters when she arrived at the hospital that he was fine, he was fine. So the early indications were that his condition was not critical. But beyond that, we're waiting. We're waiting for further information. One other thing, we were told for the first hour, perhaps a little less than an hour, that the President had not been hurt. There was a rumor going around that perhaps he had hit his head as he was pushed into the limousine. It now turns out that even the top members of the White House staff were not informed of the President's condition until he was in the hospital himself, and they could examine him and determine what his condition was. And that's really all we have for now. Roger?
Judy, the hometown of the man identified by the Secret Service as the assailant, whose name is John Warnick Hinckley of Evergreen, Colorado. Small town about 20 miles southwest of Denver, a small mountain town. Its county is Jefferson County, and the sheriff's office in Jefferson County says it has no criminal record on John Warnick Hinckley, Jr. The local NBC affiliate out there has no information about him. Apparently, everybody is on its way, though. Everybody is on their way to Evergreen, Colorado, 20 miles south of Denver. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported this afternoon that an employee in the Secret Service office in Fort Worth, Texas, saw the televised report of today's shooting, then notified the command post at the Hyatt Regency, which is the hotel where Vice President Bush was speaking today, and then the command post radioed the Vice President, who was out at the Carswell Air Force Base, and that caused the Vice President immediately to board his plane and head back to Washington. The Vice President had planned to fly to Austin for a speech, but that obviously was canceled, and he's on his way here. We're getting little bits and pieces of information as they come in from the wires and from various reporters. President Reagan's younger son, Ronald, who is a dancer with the Joffrey Ballet in New York, received word of the assassination attempt, and he was out in Lincoln, Nebraska in the hotel room. He has not spoken to reporters, but he's on the road with his ballet troupe. Now, we're going to try to see the tape that was made earlier with Assistant White House Press Secretary Larry Speake, who was at George Washington University Hospital.
The President was shot once.
Louder!
The President was shot once in the left side. His condition is stable. That's the extent of it.
Will he be going into surgery?
I don't know, Sam. That's the extent of it. Grady was shot. I have nothing further on that.
How about the others?
Conscious? Larry, can you give us any indication of what the doctors say about the President's prognosis? When you say condition is stable, what does that mean?
Sam, that's as far as I can go.
Any fatalities in the shooting?
Not that I'm aware of.
Secret Service or DC Police?
Not that I'm aware of.
Larry, I know you want to be careful, but can you give us any suggestion of what the doctors say about the seriousness of the President's wound?
Sam, all I can say is stable, and I just can't go any further than that.
Is there a bullet lodged in him, Larry?
As far as I know, the bullet is still in the President.
Is surgery scheduled? Know anything about that?
No, I don't have anything on that.
Has he been given blood? Do you know that?
I don't know that, Sam.
Did the President suffer any kind of injury from the shock of the wounds? Did he suffer any kind of
Not that I'm aware of. The President is conscious and speaking, and he's stable.
Who's he talking with? Where is the Vice President?
The Vice President is out of the city, but The Vice President, as I understand it, is out of the city.
Was he taken out due to the shooting?
No.
returning?
I'm sorry. The Vice President was traveling. He was on a trip. He is in full communication. There are no problems in that way.
Is he returning?
I don't know that, Sam.
Where was he? Do you know?
I don't know that either.
Is Nancy at the president's side?
She is in the hospital, and she has seen him, and she has been with him, and she has spoken to him.
Is she with him now?
I don't know at this moment.
What can you tell us about Brady? Repeat again the president's condition.
The president's condition is stable. Okay. We are moving a press center up. I'll have somebody come out here and tell you where it is, where we can all get out of the rain, and we'll come there every half hour, whether we have information or not, whether we have anything new.
Has surgery been scheduled yet for the president?
I can't say.
Is the White House doctor here?
Go under there.
That was Larry Speaks, the young assistant press secretary at the White House. Not a very enviable position. It was Mr. Speaks who first said the president had not been hit. He assured everyone for the first 30 minutes that the president was safe, and then found out the disquieting news that the president indeed had taken a single bullet in his the left side of his chest. Mr. Speaks was under the umbrella there in front of the George Washington University Hospital, reading simply what was given to him, and which was that he was in stable condition and was conscious. Now, Judy Woodruff is at the White House on duty again. Judy?
Roger, we see Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speaks, who is now back at the White House, about to enter the press briefing room. We're told that he's going to make a statement. He is there by the side, and now he's stepping up to the podium to talk.
I wanted to come here to let you know that I will be present here throughout. Lynn Knopfsiger's at the hospital. He will be making statements from there. We will have the same information here. I can only say what we said earlier, that the president has a gunshot wound in the left side of the chest. He is in stable condition. Jim Brady has been shot. It is a head wound. We have no information on his condition. That's the extent. I can't say, Leslie.
We have gotten confirmed reports, so have other network news, so have the wires. Can't you help us with that, Larry?
As soon as we can confirm it, we will. And
Larry, his brother's been called by the White House and has been told that the president is in surgery right now, that he's already had blood transfusions. Is your information going to be that far behind what we're getting from other sources?
No, Leslie, we will do our very best to keep it up. As you know, earlier when I was out here, our initial reports was that the president was not hit. That's what we run into when we try to give information when we aren't 100% sure or we don't have it from the source. We do have somebody there with the president. I will be here, and I just want to let you know I'll come down every 15 or 20 or 30 minutes just to let you know exactly what we know, and we'll also let you know when we don't have any further information.
Larry, when will
what you just said now, is that the extent of what you know?
That's the extent of what I can say at this time.
Surgery and come back.
phone call or something?
I will.
Larry,
Sure.
Understanding of how infected the chest wound is?
No.
Do you have any idea that there are reports that it comes from the lung?
We can't confirm that yet. We've talked to the doctors, but, you know, we cannot confirm that yet.
When will the decision be made on surgery?
Reports that Jim is in surgery now.
Yes.
What process does the United States government go through with foreign governments when something like this occurs?
Jerry, there is a notification process, and I think the State Department has moved on that.
The U.S. military been placed on any higher readiness?
Not that I'm aware of. There were some questions about the Vice President. I understand he was in Texas today. He is returning. He is expected to arrive at Andrews around 8 o'clock this evening, according to the information I have now. He has been informed. He is in communication.
Question about
powers?
No.
Can there be a division of labor of any kind?
Not that I'm aware of. We just haven't crossed those bridges yet.
What's the nature of the notification that the State Department is making to foreign governments?
I'm sure it's a notification to indicate that the, you know, that the president is in stable condition.
Larry, why is there a delay?
If the president goes into surgery and goes under anesthesia, Vice President Bush become the acting president at that moment, or under what circumstances does he?
I cannot answer that question, which is technical and legal.
What about the crisis management team? Does that come into effect?
What is the consideration in not keeping us more up to date on the president's condition? We know he's in surgery, and no one seems to be able to come out and confirm it. Why the time lag?
Leslie, I would assure you there's no reason except we want to be completely sure of our facts.
What congressional sources are confirming it?
Well, I'm sorry, I cannot do it from here at this time.
What can you tell us about the gunman who's in custody?
Absolutely nothing. That would have to come from the Secret Service or the police.
Larry, who will be determining the status of the president, whether the vice president should in fact become the acting president?
Pardon?
Who will be determining the status of the president?
I don't know the details on that. I'll let you know shortly.
Roger, we have just heard from...
Now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated. Now, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to take them. Crisis management is in effect.
What are the extent of the president's injuries?
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the president, the vice president, and the secretary of state in that order. And should the president decide he wants to transfer the helm to the vice president, he will do so.
What is the...
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the vice president, and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
What are the extent of the president's injuries?
Well, as best we know, he's had one round into his body, in the left side, into the left lung, and there is a surgery underway to remove the round now. When the president entered surgery, he was conscious. All his signs were stable, and the situation is very clear.
Why did they convert surgery? By phone? Before surgery?
No, I did not, nor was it necessary. I was in close touch with both Mr. Meese and Mr. Baker throughout, and have been from the early moments.
Approximately when did you arrive at the White House?
Very few moments after the incident. Very few moments after the incident.
And do you know what is the condition, Mr. Brady?
We understand that I just saw on television what you saw, and it sounds serious.
What's the reaction of the Soviets in this? What is any reaction?
I don't anticipate any reaction. I think you've gotten all that you need for the moment, and thank you.
Will you remain in charge here until the vice president?
We'll stay right where we are until the situation clarifies.
When does the vice president expect this surgery, sir? When is the vice president expected here?
Later this afternoon. He'll be here shortly.
When the operation began, sir, on the president, at what time?
Was I here? Yes, I was here.
What time the operation began? What time was the operation?
I don't know. Just it was shortly after that announcement that you heard on the radio, on television.
Vice President be back, sir?
Early evening. Well, I'm not going to make it a habit of saying where. He'll be back.
Come back and talk to us soon?
Thank you. If it's necessary, of course.
Any additional measures being taken? Was there a conspiracy, or was this an act?
There are no indications of anything like that now, and we are not going to say a word on that subject until the situation clarifies, of course.
From what you know from the president's condition, that the vice president will have to, for a period of time, take the role of acting president?
That's a fundamentally premature question, and I couldn't answer it. Thank you very much.
Is he under anesthesia now? He said he's been. We have just heard, to repeat, from Secretary of State Alexander Haig, who has given us an update on the situation. We are told that the president is in surgery now, that he was wounded in the lung. We knew, of course, earlier that he was hit on the left side of his chest, and the Secretary of State confirmed that the lung was hit, although we still don't know the extent of the wound. We know that the president was conscious when he went into the operating room. This is what Secretary Haig just confirmed, and we assume now, of course, that he's under anesthesia as the actual surgery proceeds. A few other things that we were told by the Secretary of State. We have notified, the government has notified allies abroad that the president is in stable condition. When we asked who was in charge, because we had been told earlier that the authority of the presidency had not been transferred to the vice president, who is still en route back to Washington, that Secretary of State Haig is nominally in charge now in the White House. He is, I suppose, operating out of the Situation Room with Defense Secretary Weinberger and other high-ranking officials of the cabinet. Standing at Mr. Haig's side was the president's national security advisor, Richard Allen, who didn't have anything to add to what Mr. Haig said. Just one more quick wrap-up. The president is in surgery now. There was a puncture wound of the lung. We assume he is under anesthesia, and we will have to wait for further reports. And now back to Ed Newman, who's in New York.
Thank you, Judy. In fact, we now have a report from the hospital that the President Reagan underwent surgery this afternoon, which suggests that the surgery has been completed, and he is reported to be in good condition. President Reagan has undergone surgery at George Washington University Hospital in Washington. He is reported to be in good condition. Now, this is the first time that we've had a word like good used, and it was noticeable that in all the statements that have been made by White House people and by Secretary of State Haig, nobody has used any word to characterize the president's condition, whether serious or anything else. But we now have that President Reagan is reported to be in good condition after having undergone surgery for the removal of the bullet that entered his left side earlier this afternoon. We also are told that Vice President Bush should be arriving at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington between 6 and 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this evening. There will be no coverage of his arrival by the press. We presume that Vice President Bush will go either to the hospital or to the White House immediately upon his arrival. The press will not be admitted to Andrews Air Force Base to cover that arrival. Now back to Roger Mudd in Washington.
We just heard Secretary of State Alexander Haig come into the White House briefing room. Obviously, his voice was wobbly. He, to all who were there, is under some sort of strain, and he was careful to point out that he is in very close touch with the Vice President. They, of course, just went through a power struggle here in Washington a week ago, in which Vice President Bush was given control of the crisis management team, and now when there is a crisis, it is Vice President Bush who is not here to manage. So the man who was denied that job, Alexander Haig, is now in fact in charge of crisis management. He said he was in touch with the Vice President, that all the proper cabinet officers were in the crisis room, and that means Secretaries of State, Treasury, the Pentagon, and the Attorney General. And it was the Secretary of State who provided us with the scoop that the President was undergoing surgery. Larry Speaks, the Deputy Press Secretary, said he could not confirm that. The most interesting thing that Larry Speaks said when he was asked, Larry, is that the extent of what you know? Larry Speaks replied, that's the extent of what I can say, which means that most officials at the White House know a great deal more than they are telling us. Now, we have a series of still photographs from the incidents outside the hotel, in which you can see in the right edge of your picture a small handgun. Presumably, we are not sure, but presumably this is the gun in the hand of John Warnick Hinckley Jr. of Evergreen, Ohio. Presumably, we report that because there's no certain evidence, but that is a gun, a handgun, a .22 caliber handgun pointed in the direction of the President of the United States. You can see that this is Rick Ahern, who is a longtime advance man for Republican presidential candidates, over the prostrate body of Jim Brady, the presidential press secretary. He is on the ground. A body pointing the other way, you can see the police cap has been knocked off his head, is Metropolitan Police Officer Delahunty, first name still unknown. Mr. Delahunty is at the Washington Hospital Center, said to be in critical condition. Alexander Haig said a moment ago that Jim Brady's condition, quote, sounds serious. The secretary was quoting back to the press and television reporters exactly what he was hearing on the television, which is, of course, being supplied by the press. So there's an awful lot of information being passed hand to hand and being circulated all over Washington. The next report that we will get should come from the White House or from a press headquarters that's being set up at George Washington Hospital, which is about a mile. To the, if I can figure it out quickly, to the west of the White House. We had reported earlier that Majority Leader Baker was in touch with the White House, and he had reported that the president was indeed undergoing surgery, and Tom Pettit is at the Capitol now. Tom?
Roger, there's been a mood of deep concern and shock here at the Capitol. Senator Baker probably the foremost among them, because he's been trying to shepherd the president's budget program through Senate debate. Now the Senate is in recess, waiting on the president's condition. The House is in recess, too. Among those who reacted first to news of the shooting was Senator Kennedy. I'd like to read you part of what he said on the floor of the Senate. He said, "With our prayers for those wounded today, must go our resolve to rid society of violence and to eliminate hatred." Those were familiar words from Senator Kennedy. Other senators said similar things, but most were watching the story on television, just off the Senate floor and off the House floor. As it turned out, Senator Kennedy, who lost 2 brothers, and Senator Long, whose father was assassinated, were watching this report of another assassination attempt just off the Senate floor with Senator Alan Cranston of California. Cranston said for all of them, no one said very much. Roger?
Tom, the wire services do have a few bits and pieces of senatorial and congressional reaction. Henry Jackson, Democrat of Washington State, himself a former presidential candidate, said, "We're reminded once again of how dangerous this world is." Jackson said again, "Our hopes are dashed that violence once again would not visit an American president." What can one say? The senator asked. Obviously, the man had to be a fanatic, according to Jackson. Senator Claiborne Pell, Democrat of Rhode Island, said the general atmosphere of all of us is one of shock and horror. One of the eyewitnesses to today's attempted presidential assassination was a name we've quoted before, Hank Brown, who was a cameraman at the American Broadcasting Company News Department. We have a videotape of Mr. Brown reporting what he saw outside the Washington Hilton Hotel.
When they heard the fire go off, he turned and he hit and went down.
Did the guy yell anything or say anything?
He did not. He just opened up and started firing.
And
how far was
a
it?
number of shots, too.
It's about 4 to 5 shots. How far was he from the president? He was about 10 feet from the president. He was in the press line. He penetrated the press line.
Did you notice him beforehand?
No, I talked to our liaison person from the Secret Service and told him that we were penetrated before, and that it's hampering our coverage, and it's causing a security problem as it is, and they were going to work on it, but apparently it's too late.
You said it today.
I said it today.
Did other people in your line?
Yes.
What's your name?
Hank Brown.
You saw the guy with the gun.
That was Hank Brown, a cameraman for the ABC News division, giving his eyewitness account of what he saw just outside the Washington Hilton. The United Press International's White House reporter is Dean Reynolds, who incidentally is the son of Frank Reynolds, who also works for ABC. And Dean Reynolds has just had transmitted on the UPI wire his eyewitness account, and with your permission, I'll read it. It says, President Reagan had just completed his speech, one of his many defenses of his economic program, when he headed, as always, to his awaiting motorcade. Outside the Washington Hilton Hotel on Florida Avenue, the president was greeted by the cheers of several hundred bystanders. I'm reading now from the UPI account written by Dean Reynolds. Reagan waved in his good-natured fashion and smiled to the crowd as he walked from a service entrance the 25 steps to the presidential limousine. As the president stepped off the curb onto the driveway where his limousine was parked, something attracted his attention, and he turned, facing the curb and the hotel wall where his assailant was standing somewhere among the bystanders. Suddenly, writes Reynolds, there were 4 or 5 loud bursts, sounding like firecrackers, and the smell of gun smoke hung in the air. The crowd recoiled in horror. There were screams. Handguns and automatic weapons were suddenly visible in the hands of police and Secret Service agents. and then the wire breaks off there with 3 words, more, 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 indicating that in a matter of another minute or two, there'll be a new transmission and to complete Dean Reynolds' eyewitness account of what happened outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. The Secret Service, for one last repeat of his name, the Secret Service has identified the alleged assailant as John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., 22 years old, of Evergreen, Colorado. Police in Jefferson County, which is the home county of Evergreen, 20 miles south of Denver, say there is no criminal record for John Warnock Hinckley, Jr. The weapon taken from him by the Secret Service was a .22 caliber RH handgun. The FBI has it. Mr. Hinckley is in custody, not at the Metropolitan Police Headquarters, but simply in custody at an undisclosed location here in Washington. Ed?
Roger, there is a report that young Hinckley attended high school in Dallas, Highland Park High School, although, as you've said, he is a native of Evergreen, Colorado. Of course, what people want now is as much medical information as they can possibly get, and that is indeed what we are trying to get. We're in some difficulty over this because although all of this is taking place in a radius of perhaps a mile, it is very difficult to get any up-to-date medical information on what is being done with President Reagan and how he is standing up to the surgery, what the result of the surgery is. We did carry a report earlier that he had undergone emergency surgery at George Washington University Hospital for the removal of the bullet. There are other reports that all that, and incidentally was in good condition after that. There are other reports that, in fact, the surgery was exploratory in nature, and it is possible, and we have to say this in the absence of expert medical testimony, it is possible that when the physicians began the operation, they did not know whether they would be able to remove the bullet, and it is equally possible that they were simply trying to see what the president's condition was and what the best kind of surgical treatment or other treatment might be in the immediate future. So it may well have been exploratory surgery. We are waiting to hear, and we trust that the White House will be giving us some information about this very shortly. It does seem as though the people at the White House, notably Mr. Speaks, the deputy press secretary, had been largely denied any information when he was sent out to speak to the reporters who were inquiring about what the president's condition was, what the extent of his injuries was. For example, there was a report an hour or an hour and a half ago, perhaps, that the president's left lung had become involved, that the bullet had collapsed his left lung. We do not know. That report was carried. We hesitate to carry reports of that kind without a confirmation, but we do try to put out any information that we can that appears to be reliable. And we don't want to deny you information that may become important later on. There is a further point to be made, which is that you may be hearing from time to time information that you've heard before. In fact, there is no way out of that. A certain amount of repetition can't be avoided, and in any case, there are people who are tuning in who have not been with us from the beginning of these unhappy events, and we do have to bring them up to date. So at this stage, we are still waiting to know precisely what happened in the surgery that was undertaken on President Reagan at George Washington University Hospital this afternoon. As you've heard, the president's son, Ron, the ballet dancer, was in a hotel in Lincoln, Nebraska when he heard about the assassination attempt. His company, the company of which he is a member, Joffrey II, is in Lincoln performing and scheduled to perform tonight. The information at the moment from that city is that the performance will go ahead as things now stand, but young Reagan is planning to leave Lincoln. We presume that he is going to Washington. Secret Service agents are with him. In our Washington Bureau now is Marvin Kalb. Marvin, can you hear me?
Yes, Ed, I do hear you, and we are still trying to monitor this situation as best we can. The news that we have up to this point, at any rate, is that the surgery for President Reagan has been completed, and he is reported to be, by at least one news service account, in good condition. You have reported that before. I think it is worthwhile pointing that out once again. I have no word at the moment as to the condition or whether indeed the surgery for the presidential press spokesman James Brady has been completed or not. Roger Mudd was reading this report by Dean Reynolds just a moment ago, And he left off at that point with a description of exactly what was happening when the president was shot. And I think it's important that we just kind of pick that up, because it'll give some of the flavor of exactly what was happening. I dropped into a crouch, the man said, but kept my eyes on the president. He appeared to have a frightened, almost bewildered look just after the shots rang out. Secret Service agents spun him around and shoved him headfirst into the limousine. All the while, the agents kept shouting, get back," to the crowd. The shots, fired in rapid succession, could not have been fired for more than 10 or 15 feet from the president. Judy Woodruff is at the White House, and I'd like to ask her what the latest stuff is. Judy?
We have just received word here, Marvin, that Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speakes is about to come back into the briefing room to tell us the latest on the events of this afternoon. We're waiting for him to come in. No, it turns out that they are handing out sheets of paper. Perhaps I can get someone to bring me one, and could you bring me one now, sir? And we'll find out what it is they're saying. We had just been told that Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speakes would be coming into the briefing room to give us some more information, but so far we don't see any sign of him.
That Jim Brady is still in surgery. Do you hear anything?
That is my understanding, Marvin. When Alexander Haig, Secretary of State Haig, was in here just a few moments ago, he told us that as far as he knew, Brady was still in surgery. There has been almost no information whatsoever about Brady's condition, except for the fact that it's critical. We do know that he was hit in the head, in the forehead, and we presume it's quite serious, but beyond that, we don't know.
Judy, is that a medical description, the term critical? Is this something that has been passed on by the people at George Washington University Hospital, do you know?
Marvin, that's my understanding, but it's hard to say from this vantage point.
Yes.
There have been so many stories passed around. I presume that is a medical reference, but I'm just not sure.
It certainly appeared that James Brady had been very seriously wounded. From the early tape that we saw about an hour or two ago, there was blood that was coming from his forehead. You can see the picture right there. It was all done so close, and it all happened so fast. The gunman appeared to be no more than 10 or 15 feet away from the president as he was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel. James Brady was near him. There was the usual complement of Secret Service men, and then suddenly there were the shots and the president being shoved into the car. Ed Newman in New York, what have you got?
Marvin, we have some more information on the background of John Warnock Hinckley, the suspect arrested today in the shooting of the president and of the others. He is from Evergreen, Colorado, but we're told that he attended high school in Dallas, Highland Park High School in Dallas, and also that he worked as a disc jockey for a while at a country music radio station in Denver under the name of John Warlock. Warlock is his middle name. His full name is John Warlock Hinckley, Jr. So far as we've been able to determine, he has no previous record. Arraignment papers in his case are now being drawn up, and he will be arraigned, we're told, as soon as the presiding judge in the proper court in Washington arrives. John Warnock Hinckley, 22, Evergreen, Colorado, the suspect in the shooting, attended, we're told, Highland Park High School in Dallas, Texas, worked as a disc jockey at a country music station, radio station in Denver, under the name of John Warlock. No previous record. The arraignment papers in the process of being drawn up. We're going to have a look again at the videotape of the shooting incident because of something that has struck a number of people here at NBC. As the shots are fired, you will notice everybody looking off in one direction. Let's see whether we can catch this. The president is waving. You see him in the background in the dark suit. Suddenly, the shots are fired. People duck. Somebody dives over to the right to the man who's done the shooting, but the people we saw earlier appeared to be looking to their left. It may have been the camera angle that they were looking to their left, but also, in a way, as far as they could tell, looking behind them. But the gunman appeared to be to the right and behind the president. whereas the people around the president were looking to the left. So, is this significant? I suppose the usual speculation was there more than one gunman. Did the shots come from here or did they come from there? It appears to have been established by the law enforcement officers on the scene that there was only one man. He has been identified, so far as they're concerned, as John Warlock Hinckley, Jr. of Evergreen, Colorado. Although people were looking in one direction and it is possible that the shots were coming from another, one can easily be deceived about the source from which firing comes. Let's go back to Marvin Kalb in Washington.
We had a few more late developments here as we understand them. Carl Stern has just reported in that there is a meeting in the Office of the Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice to discuss the whole question of presidential disability. This is not a clear-cut issue. Nobody is absolutely certain what happens at any one point in the disability of a president, but it ought to be pointed out that the president, having completed surgery, is described in good condition. And Vice President Bush is returning from a trip to Texas, and he should be returning to Washington, landing at Andrews Air Force Base between 6 and 6:30 tonight Eastern Standard Time. We also have some additional information given by our correspondent James Polk concerning Mr. Hinckley, the suspect in this assassination attempt. It's all very sketchy information, but what we do know is this, some of it you've already heard. His name fully, John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., young man taken into custody today in this assassination attempt. He is from Evergreen, Colorado. It's a small town about 20 miles southwest of Denver, Colorado. He grew up there, one of 3 children of a successful businessman, according to residents in that small community. The family then moved to Texas. We're told Hinckley went to high school in Dallas, that he graduated in 1973. His age has been given at various times today as 22, 23, or 25 years of age. The people in Evergreen believe Hinckley went to college somewhere in Texas. They're not really sure. The family moved back to Evergreen a few years ago. Father said to be an oil man, the head of an energy and oil company in Denver. This has not been confirmed as yet. All of our information is sketchy, and as we repeat once again, Hinckley, the suspect in this case, has no criminal record that we are yet aware of. The particular eyewitness account, which we were reading to you before, on the basis of a reporter who was there on the scene, saw it all. He said at one point, as we know, that the action was taking place about 10 to 15 feet away from where the president. Let me just continue reading here. The limousine pulled away seconds after the president was pushed inside. A scuffle to the right of the limousine, the kind of tape that we just saw a moment ago, indicating that the suspect was picked up to the right of the car, and yet, as Ed Newman did point out, many of the eyes were focused somewhat to the left as we were looking at the picture. In any case, a scuffle to the right of the limousine then caught my attention. A young blond man was being subdued on his back by several agents and policemen. There was a mob of lawmen on the ground, and the tops of 2 legs, clad in dark trousers, were visible, sticking out from, and I'll pick it up. It's cut off at that point, but let me pick it up on the next round here. I saw no one hit, says this reporter who was on the scene. Learned only later that the president had been wounded, along with the White House press secretary, Jim Brady. The gunman had been on the sidewalk, standing close to the hotel wall. Reporters were on the other side of the limousine, the top of a triangle from the president and the gunman. It was like being in a vacuum, the reporter says, Dean Reynolds, with everything in slow motion. It took a second or two before anything registered. But when I saw the look of enormous stress and the clenched teeth of the Secret Service agents, I knew it was more than just firecrackers. And indeed it was. To bring us up to date quickly at this point, President Reagan, having finished a speech before the AFL-CIO at the Washington Hilton Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C., was walking outside towards his limousine, surrounded by the Secret Service men, when suddenly what seemed like a half-dozen shots rang out very, very quickly. And the president, after what seemed like the first or second shot, was pushed to the ground. This is another angle on the tape itself, and you can see the absolute utter chaos when the shots were fired. The cameraman clearly trying to circle the president's car here and get as close as he could. police pushing people out of the way. The president's car was whisked off just at that point. Other members, other cars in that presidential cavalcade following the president's car. James Brady, the presidential press spokesman, was on the ground at that point. A close-up shot would indicate that he had some kind of bullet wound on his forehead. We do not at this point, I repeat, have any notion really in any official way of how seriously wounded Mr. Brady was. He was on the ground, and minutes after this scene that you're looking at now, this is all tape, by the way, this is not live. This is what happened approximately 2 hours or a little more ago. This is all right at the side of the Washington Hilton Hotel. A Secret Service man, a policeman as well, wounded, along with President Reagan and his spokesman, James Brady. The president, we are told, walked into George Washington University Hospital, despite the fact that he had been hit by a bullet, carrying the bullet. The president underwent surgery, and according to one wire service report that we have seen, he is said to be in good condition. Mr. Brady himself, the press spokesman, we have not been told whether his operation has been concluded as yet, and to repeat, we do not know in any official way the seriousness of his condition, other than to note the obvious, he was very seriously wounded. One could almost imagine, just looking, this is another version right now of exactly what happened. The president walking out, as you can see, waving, and then suddenly the shots. And just as quickly, somebody being subdued right here to the right of the automobile. And we can't see it, but in the other version of the tape, you saw it a moment ago, the car being driven away very, very quickly. It seemed as though only 2, perhaps, of the 6 shots that had been fired had actually been fired by the time the president was pushed very forcibly into the back of his limousine and whisked off. By the time you see this, the president's car is already gone. And what you are looking at right now is the body down on his stomach of James Brady, the press spokesman. The arrest scene, actually, the actual taking into custody of the suspect, happened just about at this point. They are now hustling him in towards a police car, a Washington police car, right in front of the hotel, to the side of the hotel, actually. They had covered his head either with his own raincoat or somebody else's, but they had pushed him right now, as you can see, hustling him off in the direction of the car. The door opens up, an agent gets in first, the suspect second. People being pushed aside. You can look through the car now, but not get a clear shot at the suspect at all. But the car itself, by itself, going up towards Connecticut Avenue, away from the hotel. Let me just go through this once more. 4 people were shot this afternoon. It was the president himself, shot on the left side, his lung reportedly pierced. The operation has been completed at George Washington Hospital, and we are told by one wire service report at any rate that his condition is good. In addition, his press spokesman, James Brady, was shot. We saw pictures of it a moment ago. He was wounded in his forehead. We do not know how serious that particular condition is, except that he is still undergoing surgery so far as we know. There was a Secret Service man who was hit. There was a policeman from the Washington force also hit. Mrs. Reagan rushed to George Washington University Hospital immediately, looking obviously very shaken. She went on into the hospital and had talked with the president before the surgery took place. She is now there. We know that other members of the Reagan family, I have that copy right here. If I were in better control of it, I could tell you exactly what happened, but the president's son was going to be rushing towards Washington, and the president's daughter was in a state of shock when she learned about it herself. We are told as well that the limousine right here that you can see, the bullet holes right there, you can see it, but we're told that it did not, and it does not appear to have gone through the window itself, so that when the president was shot, it must have been in that split second when the first one or two shots were being heard. There it is right there. As he was being pushed in through that door, other shots came in and hit the car so that the door itself protected him from further wounds. Just picking this up once again, the latest story from Dean Reynolds, who was one of the reporters on the scene, and we were reading some of his eyewitness accounts before, a reporter for the UPI. Just to report this once again, President Reagan was shot in the chest Monday by a gunman firing from very close range. Reagan was reported in good condition, underwent surgery to remove a small caliber bullet. The gunman identified by the Secret Service as John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., 22 years of age, from Evergreen, Colorado. Also critically wounded, White House Press Secretary James Brady. Reagan political aide Lynn Nofziger said that the president was shot once in the left chest, was conscious, talking, stable condition. The president, to repeat this extraordinary fact, the president walked into George Washington University Hospital, then, on his own power, then underwent the surgery for the removal of this .22 caliber. Ed Newman, back to you.
Marvin, the point that ought to be made about the bullet that penetrated the president's body is that it was a .22 caliber bullet. We had heard first that the gunman fired a .38 caliber revolver, and if in fact he had, and he had hit the president, then obviously the wound would have been much, much larger, and it is at least unlikely that President Reagan would have been able to walk into the hospital, even with the assistance that he did have as he did so. Marvin, you were saying that a meeting was taking place at the Justice Department dealing with the disability question. I did not hear everything you had to say about that. I don't know what details you have of it. Disability is something we ought to talk about, but I think we ought to say that we're prepared to be interrupted at any moment for information about President Reagan's condition. But we ought to talk a bit about disability. It is provided for in the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which was ratified, ratification was completed in February of 1967. Disability, in the first place, can force a president to hand over to a vice president. The president can do that of his own volition. That's in Section 3 of the amendment, which provides whenever the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the vice president as acting president. Now, that has not taken place. It was emphasized earlier today at the White House that the president was still the president, that Vice President Bush had not become acting president. We are discussing this because of the possibility that that will happen, and we cannot speak about that with any certainty or anything approaching certainty until we know what the results of the surgery on President Reagan were. There is also a procedure whereby a president may be pushed aside temporarily and the vice president become acting president at the initiative of the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide. If that group, the vice president and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, transmit to the Congress their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. That can be brought to an end. The acting presidency can be brought to an end by the act of the president himself, a written declaration that no inability exists, and he then resumes the powers and duties of his office, unless, again, the vice president and the majority of the principal officers of the executive department disagree. And in that case, it becomes the business of the Congress to decide whether the president may resume his office. Now, all of this is speculative. It's hung on a great many ifs, but it is as well to know what the disability provisions in the Constitution are. Back now to Judy Woodruff at the White House.
What you've been saying, and we don't really have any new reports here at the White House. We are waiting, of course, for further word on the president's condition. As you said, we have been told that by various reports that he's in good condition following surgery, that the bullet did puncture his left lung, but beyond that, we don't have any information.
May I interrupt you? May I interrupt you for just half a sec, please? We've been operating on an assumption that the president's surgery is completed. Has anyone at the White House told you that the surgery is completed? Has any official stated that he is in good condition, to the best of your knowledge at this point?
No, all we have been told, and this was more than half an hour ago, 40 minutes ago probably, by Secretary of State Haig, and that was that he was undergoing surgery at the time, that he was in stable condition when the surgery began, that he was conscious. All indications were that, that there were no complications, but beyond that, we have received no official word.
I'm only raising that question, obviously, because we do lack the official word at this particular point.
That's true.
And when this afternoon of horror began, we were told first by the White House that the president had not even been hit. So we want to be absolutely sure as we pass on all of this information that it is confirmed to the best of our knowledge at this point. We are very much at the mercy of the information that the officials at the George Washington University Hospital choose to pass on to us, and we'll pass that on as soon as we get them. And be very careful to label from the very beginning exactly what we know to be fact and what our sources are.
That's a good point. I think the presumption we made was that that report had come from the hospital, but as I just said, it did not come from here at the White House. The other point that I thought it might be useful to make it right now is that, to repeat, I was there at the hotel when the shooting happened. The gunman was behind press corps lines when he fired at the president and at the other people. Somehow he had permission to stand there with other reporters and photographers to be within a distance of 8, 10, 12 feet from the president. How he got there, whether he had press credentials, we don't know. There has been one report passed around the White House press room. I have no way of knowing whether this is true or not, and that is that some of the reporters had asked some of the security people there at the hotel to ask citizens, members of the public, to be removed from the press pen so that they could get a better picture, a better view of the president as he left the hotel. But again, that is not confirmed. That's just a story that we picked up among conversation here in the press room. But
it might be a matter of curiosity to a lot of people at this point. When a reporter gets to cover one of these stories, and what we're doing here is doing the kind of stakeout work that we all have to do in covering presidents, secretaries of state, you are often involved in a lot of make work when you watch for what amounts to something like 10 seconds when a president or a secretary or some important person is exposed to the public before he gets into a bulletproof limousine. And you were making the point before how this suspect actually was able to mingle with the reporters covering the president. And I imagine, just out of curiosity, how could that happen? Could anyone just mingle with you as you were standing outside?
Well, normally, no. Normally, one would have to display a press credential, a White House press credential or some sort of national press credential in order to stand in an area closer than where the public can stand. I was part of what we call the press pool, which is a representative group of reporters and photographers who will travel with the president to and from, say if he's going across town, as he was in this case, a mile and a half away from the White House to make a speech. We were in the motorcade following him. We went into the Hilton. We listened to his speech. We were ushered out another exit from the one he came out. I was outside watching as he came out the door, of course, that you've seen him walk out on the pictures we've shown this afternoon. The group of reporters where the gunman was standing was even closer to the president than where I was standing. I was probably a car and a half, a length of a car and a half away from where he was. The reporters, the photographers, and the gunman were apparently no more than a dozen feet away from him, so they were even closer than where we were. There were more members of the public who were standing around behind us closer to a group of doors at the Hilton. There were more people standing across the street in addition. But he was very close. He was within 12, 15 feet.
It's an extraordinary thing, and it does remind everybody that of the saying that we have heard from people since the Kennedy assassination in 1963, that if somebody is intent on doing damage, on hurting the President of the United States, given the fact that he does move around and he is open and it is a free society, it is terribly difficult to stop him. We have word from our Atlanta bureau that former President Carter is anxiously awaiting further word on President Reagan's condition and that of the others who have been wounded, that he and Mrs. Carter join the entire nation in prayer and hope for the well-being of those who were wounded and, of course, well-being as well, and prayers for their family. The Carters are in Plains, Georgia. About an hour ago, Secretary of State Haig appeared in the press room at the White House and told reporters that Vice President Bush is now airborne and returning from a speaking engagement in Texas to Washington, should be returning to Washington between 6 and 6:30 this evening, at which point he will be going, we presume, directly to the George Washington University Hospital, where President Reagan is now either just recuperating from surgery or finishing surgery. We are not absolutely clear. During the course of that briefing, Secretary of State Haig pointed out that there is a chain of command. The President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, as he said, and I quote, "As of now, I am in control here in the White House pending the return of the Vice President." At the White House earlier, David Gergen, who's an assistant to the President, was asked whether the Vice President would soon be acting as President under these conditions, and Mr. Gergen replied, no. We also know that, from what we mentioned a moment ago, that at the Department of Justice, they are now having a meeting and discussing the question of presidential disability. Ed Newman.
Marvin, you made the point that we do not know whether the operation on President Reagan has been completed. We don't know whether he is at this moment recuperating. We don't, in fact, know what the operation was, whether it was exploratory surgery, whether it was surgery to remove the bullet. We have had both versions. The point to be made, I suppose, is that in the absence of official information on this point, a good many rumors are floating around, and one that started an hour and a half ago, probably, perhaps longer ago than that, was that the President's left lung had been in some way damaged by the shot that was fired into his side. Now, that has not been officially stated, but it is a report that is going around, and we feel that we have to give it to you, even though we are not able to confirm it. We give it to you with the proviso, the warning that it is not official, but we don't know at this stage exactly what the injuries to the President are, and we do not know, therefore, what kind of surgery is taking place. We do have some information about one of the others shot today, the Washington or District of Columbia policeman, Thomas Delahanty, who was 45 years old. He was hit in the shoulder and the neck, and his condition is described as very critical. Now back to Marvin Kalb in Washington.
Ed, the word that we have from the George Washington University Hospital is that the President's condition is stable. We do not have official word as yet that says that his condition is good, as has been reported by one wire service. It may very well be that his condition is good. I'm only repeating that because we have no official word of that. His condition is described as stable. We do not know officially as yet, I might add, whether the surgery has actually been completed. We were told earlier that he underwent surgery, and we are assuming thereby that the surgery has been completed. We have a tape ready. The last time we got official word from the White House was when Larry Speaks, who's the deputy presidential press spokesman, was chatting. Let's pick that up right now if we can.
To talk.
I wanted to come here to let you know that I will be present here throughout. Lynn Knopfsiger's at the hospital. He will be making statements from there. We will have the same information here. I can only say what we said earlier, that the President has a gunshot wound in the left side of the chest. He is in stable condition. Jim Brady has been shot. It is a head wound. We have no information on his condition. That's the extent. I can't say, Leslie.
We have gotten confirmed reports, so have other network news, so have the wires. Can't you help us with that, Larry?
As soon as we can confirm it, we will. And
His brother's been called by the White House and has been told that the president is in surgery right now, that he's already had blood transfusions. Is your information going to be that far behind what we're getting from other sources?
No, Leslie, we will do our very best to keep it up. As you know, earlier when I was out here, our initial reports was that the president was not hit. That's what we run into when we try to give information when we aren't 100% sure or we don't have it from the source. We do have somebody there with the president. I will be here, and I just want to let you know I'll come down every 15 or 20 or 30 minutes just to let you know exactly what we know, and we'll also let you know when we don't have any further information.
Larry,
You
when
know
will
what
a
you just
decision
said
be
now?
made
Is that
on
the extent of
surgery?
what you know?
That's the extent of what I can say at this time.
Surgery and
with
come
a
back?
phone call or something?
I will.
Larry, do you
Sure.
have an understanding of how effective the chest wound is?
No.
Do you have any idea that there are reports that it punctured the lung?
We can't confirm that yet. We've talked to the doctors, but, you know, we cannot confirm that yet.
When will the decision be made on surgery?
Reports that Jim is in surgery now.
Yes.
What process does the United States government go through with foreign governments when something like this occurs?
Jerry, there is a notification process, and I think the State Department has moved on that.
Has the U.S. military been placed on any higher readiness?
Not that I'm aware of. There were some questions about the Vice President. I understand he was in Texas today. He is returning. He's expected to arrive at Andrews around 8 o'clock this evening, according to the information I have now. He has been informed. He is in communication.
Question about
powers? Will he assume?
Can there be a division of labor of any kind?
Not that I'm aware of. We just haven't crossed those bridges yet.
What's the nature of the notification that the State Department is making to foreign governments?
I'm sure it's a notification to indicate that the, you know, that the president is in stable condition.
Larry,
why is there a delay?
If the president goes into surgery and goes under anesthesia, Vice President Bush become the acting president at that moment, or under what circumstances does he?
I cannot answer that question, which is technical and legal.
What about the crisis management team? Does that come into effect?
What is the consideration in not keeping us more up to date on the president's condition? We know he's in surgery, and no one seems to be able to come out and confirm it. Why the time lag?
Leslie, I would assure you there's no reason except we want to be completely sure of our facts.
What
No matter what
congressional
that.
sources are confirming?
Well, I'm sorry, I cannot do it from here at this time.
What can you tell us about the gunman who's in custody?
Absolutely nothing. That would have to come in Secret Service or the police.
Larry, who will be determining the status of the president, whether the vice president should in fact become the acting president?
Pardon?
Who will be determining the status of the president?
I don't know the details on that. I'll let you know shortly.
We would like to know the exact time that Mr. Speaks was speaking then, because he did point out at that time, and I think it is at least an hour, that he would come back and get word to the press every 15 minutes or so, and if he himself would not come out, then he would at least get word to the press. To the best of my knowledge, there is still no direct follow-up information, except that the president did undergo surgery, we believe, and it is reported that his condition is stable. We ought to point out that Mrs. Reagan is at the hospital, as are a number of the president's top advisors. We have now a report that Lynn Notziger is at George Washington.
I just cannot comment on the operation. I haven't had a chance to talk to the doctors.
The surgeon who was operating on the president.
I do not have a name.
Do you have an idea when they came out and talked to Mrs. Reagan, they gave the indication how much longer the president would be in the operation?
The only thing that I want to say is that he will be in there for a while yet.
Do you know whether or not a lung collapse due to vessel wound?
I have not heard. As I say, the doctors say his condition is good.
Did you get to see him before the operation began?
Did she? Yes. We'll just wait and see. That's you're a little premature.
Can you confirm that it's open chest surgery?
No, I can't.
Lynn, did they give you a specific location where the bullet was? How close to the heart?
Where it entered from?
My preliminary reports were that it entered the left chest There was no indication that it nicked the heart or anything like that. I can't tell you.
Did the president lose consciousness at any time before the surgery, or was he awake?
He was conscious as he went into surgery.
Did you know?
Oh, yeah, I have some stuff here. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because I took some notes. As he was going down the hall into surgery, he winked at Baker, James Baker. Yes, as he was going down the hall on the gurney, I guess they call him, to surgery, he winked at Baker. He had earlier told Senator Laxalt, who was there, don't worry about me, I'll make it. He had told Mrs. Reagan, honey, I forgot to duck. I forgot to duck. And as they were wheeling him into surgery, he saw Meese and Baker and Deaver there, and he said, who's minding the store? And then when he got into the operating, looked at the doctors and he said, please tell me you're Republicans. So,
Are they with the Emmy tonight? You may take the whole show.
and that literally is all I have, and if you will excuse me, we will keep you informed as quickly as we know anything.
Are they filming the operation?
That was Lynn Nofziger, who used to be the press spokesman for the president until he came to Washington when the president, after his inauguration, and he became one of the president's chief political operatives, and he has now come down and given the latest word on the president's condition. He says that the president's doctors describe his condition as good, and he said that on the basis of preliminary reports, there was no indication that the president's heart had been nicked. It was not clear to me on the basis of the question and answer right then when somebody asked him whether there was open chest surgery. I believe that was the question. I think he did not choose to answer that question, but I am not certain. He then gave a litany of indication that the president's sense of humor, despite the fact that he had been shot, was in no way impaired. He winked at James Baker, who's the White House chief of staff, as he was being wheeled towards surgery, according to Nofziger. He told Senator Paul Laxalt, who was one of his closest friends, also at the hospital, don't worry, I'll make it. He told Mrs. Reagan, I forgot to duck. And he told someone else, who is minding the store? And then when he was wheeled into the operating room, he asked the doctors, please tell me that you are all Republicans, which is an indication that the presidential humor is in good shape. And it appears at this particular point, going on what Mr. Nofziger said, the president's doctors indicate that the president's condition is good. It ought to be pointed out earlier in the day, the minute this news broke, the stock market just closed down. The Capitol Hill just about closed down as well. And there were all kinds of expressions of shock and regret and good wishes for the president's family. Ed Newman?
We now have a report that James Brady, the presidential press secretary, White House press secretary, has died as a result of the wounds he suffered during the shooting this afternoon. That is not yet official. We expect it to be official at any moment. James Brady, the White House press secretary, has died of wounds received during the shooting this afternoon. We had heard earlier that another of the victims, District of Columbia policeman Delahanty, was in very critical condition. There's also a Secret Service agent who was shot. We have not yet heard what his condition is. We are awaiting official statements from the White House on all of this. In the meantime, people all over the world of prominence are sending their good wishes to President Reagan. British Prime Minister Thatcher has sent him message saying she was very distressed. Let me interrupt myself. The White House has now confirmed the death of James Brady, the White House press secretary, who was shot during the attempt on President Reagan's life outside the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington this afternoon. Originally, you may remember, we were told that President Reagan had gone to the hospital himself merely to accompany Brady. That was what the White House said. Later, it was revealed that the President himself had been shot in the left side of the chest, and we are now awaiting word, in fact, as to whether the President's operation is over and exactly what its nature was and what the result of it is. You've just heard that the President's doctors say he is in good condition, but other details we do not yet have. Back to Marvin Kelly.
Just about 5 minutes ago, when Lynn Nofziger was talking from George Washington University Hospital, he had said that his information at that time was that James Brady was in serious condition, and we now have got the word over the last couple of minutes from the White House officially that James Brady, age 40, I believe, the President's press spokesman for the past 2.5 months since the inauguration, is dead as a result of the shots taken in his head, the shot taken into his head earlier this afternoon. He obviously died in surgery. The President himself, we are told, was shot on the left side, a report of some puncture to his lung. We are told by Nofziger that his doctors say that the President's condition is good. And we were mentioning a moment ago, just before we got the news on Mr. Brady, that at the White House, at the George Washington University Hospital right now, there is the President's closest coterie of political advisors, the people who actually, as he put it in a humorous moment as he was wheeled into surgery, the people who actually mind the store. Those people are at the hospital. That's Mr. Ed Meese, the President's counselor. That's Mr. James Baker, the Chief of Staff, Mr. Deaver, Lynn Nofziger himself, Mrs. Reagan. They are all at the hospital. Over at the White House, from what we are told, we have the Secretary of State, who has already appeared on camera earlier this afternoon to tell us about the chain of command as he understood it at the time. He did point out to us that Vice President Bush is on his way back. He did say that at the White House with him were the Treasury Secretary, as I recall, the Attorney General, and the Defense Secretary of the United States. The probably 4 top cabinet members are now at the White House, to use the President's words, minding the shop. Secretary Haig said that all of America's allies had been involved. We have more information now on the late now James Brady from, no, maybe not. I'm sorry, I correct myself. Tom Pettit has some late word. Tom?
Marvin, we hear from the White House, from Lynn Nofziger, that Mr. Brady is alive. We don't know what his condition is. We don't know exactly the extent of his wounds. We don't know the outlook for him. But for those of us who know him, it is good news that he is alive. He was a popular figure up here on the Hill, worked for several senators, good sense of humor, well-liked by most of his peers and by most of the press. And that's a lot to say in the business of politics around here. We understand, first of all, that the Senate will recess for the evening after hearing a prayer for President Reagan and the others who were wounded today, and will not continue its session on the budget into the evening. The House is out of session anyway right now. We also hear, without total confirmation, that Secret Service agents have been assigned to Senator Baker, the Senate Majority Leader, and to Senator Edward Kennedy, who spoke so movingly earlier on the floor of the Senate about eradicating violence. Marvin?
Let me just make one point again, and I've made it 2 or 3 times this afternoon, but it bears repeating. And we just had a prime example of it just a moment ago. We were reporting here 5 minutes ago that there were reports out of the White House that James Brady had died as a result of the gunshot wound he took to his head. We are now told that Mr. Nofziger at the hospital is saying that Mr. Brady is alive. His condition is serious, but he is alive. To repeat, A lot of the information on an afternoon of this sort can be handled unwittingly, unintentionally, in in a way that we would not like it to be. We've got to be terribly careful about the information that we pass on to you. And at this particular point, the late word that we have on James Brady is that he is alive. His condition, according to Lynn Nopziger at the GW University Hospital, his condition serious, very serious. The president, who took a bullet to the left side of his chest, we are not certain, we have received no official word that that surgery has been completed. We were told by Mr. Nopziger, however, that the president's doctors say he is in good condition. We do not know at what stage in the surgery process he is. We do not know for a fact that the surgery has been completed. Earlier on, there were a lot of assumptions made that it had been completed because a wire service report said that he had undergone surgery. And in having undergone that surgery, there was the assumption, of course, that it was over. But we don't know that for a fact. We just want to be very clear about that. The question of conspiracy came up during Secretary Haig's appearance at the White House briefing. He did not want to get into that subject at all. And all of the information that we have at the moment is that a single suspect has been taken into custody, a 22-year-old named John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., from Jefferson County, southwest of Denver, the town of Evergreen, Colorado. I wanted to mention before, too, that some of the most moving statements have been pouring in because as people are informed all over the world, leaders of the Western Alliance have been informed that the president had been shot, obviously they are sending in all kinds of expressions of goodwill, hoping that the president will get better and will recover from this particular wound. And again, we repeat that we have been told by Mr. Nopziger, quoting the president's doctors, that his condition is good. We do not know, I'm repeating again, whether the surgery has been completed. But on the Senate floor, Edward Kennedy, two of whose brothers were slain in the 1960s, the president in 1963, the Senator Robert Kennedy in 1968. Senator Kennedy said, "With our prayers for those who have been wounded, I think must go our resolution to rid our society of hatred. Violence and hatred are alien to everything this country is about." Hillary Brown, I understand, is now at the White House, perhaps with some late word. Hillary?
Yes. Well, here at the White House, we can't confirm, it is not confirmed, whether White House Press Secretary James Brady is dead or not. Earlier, there was a report from a White House spokesman that Mr. Brady had died, but now they say they can't confirm it. And, of course, the earlier report that he had died conflicts with that given by Lynn Nopziger at the hospital, which was to say that the press secretary was still alive.
Hillary, what we are told, and it ought to be repeated, that Lynn Nopziger put out the word after all three of the networks had reported that Mr. Brady had died. He put out the word emphatically denying the report. So we go back to what Mr. Nopziger said, and we were watching him about 15 minutes ago, a live report from the George Washington Hospital. He said that Mr. Brady's condition was serious. And as we saw earlier this afternoon from the tapes, very shortly after the shooting had occurred, that there was a wound in Mr. Brady's forehead. We do not know exactly how serious it was, except the indication from all of the sources that Mr. Brady was seriously wounded. You see that picture right now. Seriously wounded. The picture taken very, very shortly after the wound was inflicted by this lone gunman standing outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. As Tom Pettit reported a moment ago, James Brady, an extraordinarily well-liked, respected press spokesman here, had worked up on Capitol Hill, had worked in the campaign, was late actually in joining the Reagan staff, had become in the last 2.5 months one of those who seemed quite close to the president. He was so close physically today, as we just saw, that he was hit by one of the bullets, one of the 6 or 7 bullets that in a fuselage of rage, came out of the back where the reporters were standing 10 or 15 feet away from where the president was seen entering his limousine after finishing a speech to the AFL-CIO at the Washington Hilton Hotel, downtown Washington, D.C., when all of a sudden those shots were fired, and people with any kind of memory had to reflect upon the time that since 1963, as we were saying before, President Kennedy assassinated, twice President Ford shot at, neither time was he hit. This particular time, this afternoon, President Reagan. Larry Speaks, we understand, at the briefing room at the White House. Here's Mr. Speaks.
Able to answer any questions. I'm essentially confirming what's been said from the hospital. The president is still in surgery and will be for a while, but the doctors in a preliminary report to Mrs. Reagan have just assured her that his condition remains good. As far as the report about Jim Brady, it is untrue, and he is in serious condition. Thank you.
Mr. Speaks has just come in at the White House press room, as you just heard yourself, and I think with an extraordinarily important bit of information just to clear up some of the questions which have been hanging fire here all afternoon. First, that President Reagan is still in surgery. His doctors have reported to Mrs. Reagan, who was at the hospital, that his condition is good. This, according to the doctors, passed on just now that word from Larry Speaks, who is the deputy presidential press spokesman. He also pointed out that the spokesman, James Brady, about whom we were talking just a moment ago, all reports concerning his death wrong. The man is in very serious condition, apparently still undergoing surgery at George Washington University Hospital. That clears up that bit of information. The fact that the president is still undergoing surgery is in itself an important and serious bit of news. But I repeat that the doctors are saying that his condition is and remains good. Earlier we were told that his condition was stable. That word was not used at this particular time, but they did quote the doctors as saying good.
Can you hear me? The statement that Larry Speaks made was, as you say, extraordinarily important. It was also very skimpy. Now that may be unavoidable given the medical nature of what is going on, but it was skimpy. All we were told was that Mr. Reagan was still in surgery. We've still not been told the nature of the operation, whether it is exploratory, whether it is to remove the bullet, whether it is to repair damage. We have not been told when he went into surgery, so that we don't know how long he has been on the table. All of this information is vital. I'm not blaming anybody for being remiss and not giving it to us, but this kind of lack of information can only lead, it seems to me, and this ought to be said, to nervousness and apprehension among the people, among the American people and other people who are watching and who are listening and who are trying to find out what has happened and how important it is. Now, whether the physicians involved are not giving information to the spokesman for the White House or whether they are unable to give the information, we do not know. But the immediate consequence of the lack of information is that reports go around which are unconfirmed. We've already mentioned several of them. For example, the very unfortunate announcement that James Brady, the White House press secretary, had died of his wounds. Now we're told that he is still alive. That information that went out must have been heard by friends and relatives, and incidentally, the governor of Illinois sent an airplane to Centralia, the home of Brady's parents, so that they could be brought to Washington. We've also carried a report that President Reagan's left lung was affected by the shooting. That has not been confirmed. We don't know whether it's true. A report has just moved on the United Press wire that President Reagan is out of the surgery and that it was exploratory in nature. So all of this information, much of it imprecise, some of it conflicting, is coming out because precise information is not being made available by those in charge. One assumes that they're unable to put it out, but I can't help wondering, and I have unfortunately been through a number of stories of this kind, whether they would not be well advised, somebody in the White House, to insist on information and insist on the information being given out just as quickly as it can be so as to still the rumors that will inevitably circulate. I don't know what your thoughts are on this. Those are mine.
Ed, I would imagine that the thoughts that you've just expressed are thoughts that have been running through all of our minds all afternoon. The brief bits of information that we have that you ought to know about is that after an hour of surgery, the doctors told Nancy Reagan that the president's condition was good, this according to Lynn Nofziger. Earlier, Mr. Nofziger had told reporters that the bullet did not hit the president's heart. Now, that particular report that you cited about the operation being over is excellent. We hope that that is absolutely accurate. There has been a good bit of flipping and flopping here all afternoon on some of the information, and the appeal that you just made, Ed Newman, for some clear and precise information would be, of course, extremely helpful in the reporting of this story, rather than passing on secondhand information from people who think that they have heard something from a doctor or from a nurse. It is best coming from people who do have the information itself. Larry Speake said earlier this afternoon that it is a danger to go with information that you feel is only 90% correct. He wants to be absolutely certain of his information. When he showed up at the White House just a few moments ago, it was a terse announcement, but at least it was clear as to what he was reporting. It ought to be mentioned, too, that the FBI, according to Agent Thomas J. Baker, told reporters shortly after 4 o'clock Eastern Time that the FBI had taken over jurisdiction in this investigation because it had occurred in the District of Columbia, the FBI interviewing 6 Secret Service agents who were on the scene. Baker said that a small caliber handgun was recovered, as well as other evidence on the scene. But it's not clear from this particular report what the other evidence is. The suspect, as we have told you several times this afternoon, and as we actually did see, was taken into custody. He now is in custody, and he will receive a hearing before a U.S. magistrate in Washington that Charles Ruth, the U.S. attorney for the district, would determine exactly what charges. Clearly, the charges are an attempt to kill the President of the United States. Some of the reactions that are coming in, as we were saying before, are really quite extraordinary. People up on the Hill talking about how dangerous the time is in which we live, and that is clearly true. And I think it might be instructive to go back to the tape of Secretary of State Alexander Haig when he appeared in the White House press room. This is about, perhaps an hour and a half ago. Let's hear what the Secretary said at that time.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to touch upon a few matters associated with today's tragedy. First, as you know, we're in close touch with the Vice President, who is returning to Washington. We have in the Situation Room all of the officials of the Cabinet who should be here and ready at this time. We have informed our friends abroad of the situation, the President's condition as we know it, stable, now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated. Now, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Management, that's what put into effect when it pushed to arrive?
Crisis management is in effect.
What are the decisions for the government right now? Who's making the decisions?
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the President decide he wants to transfer the helm to the Vice President, he will do so.
What is the...
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
What are the extent of the President's injuries?
Well, as best we know, he's had one round into his body, in the left side, into the left lung, and there is a surgery underway to remove the round now. When the President entered surgery, he was conscious. All his signs were stable, and The situation is very clear.
Why did they convert surgery? By phone? Before surgery?
No, I did not. Nor was it necessary. I was in close touch with both Mr. Meese and Mr. Baker throughout, and have been from the early moments.
Approximately when did you arrive at the White House? After
Very few moments after the incident. Very few moments after the incident.
And do you know what is the condition, Mr. Brady?
We understand that I just saw on television what you saw, and it sounds serious.
What's the reaction of the Soviets in this? What is the reaction?
I don't anticipate any reaction. I think you've gotten all that you need for the moment, and thank you.
Will you remain in charge here until the Vice President?
We'll stay right where we are until the situation clarifies.
When does the Vice President expect this surgery, sir? When is the Vice President expected here?
Later this afternoon. He'll be here shortly.
When the operation began, sir, on the President, at what time?
Was I here? Yes, I was here.
What time the operation began? What time was the operation?
I don't know. Just it was shortly after that announcement that you heard on the radio, on television.
Be back, sir?
Early evening. Well, I'm not going to make it a habit of saying where. He'll be back.
Come back and talk to us, sir?
Thank you. If it's necessary, of course.
Any additional measures being taken? Was there a conspiracy, or was this an act?
There are no indications of anything like that now, and we are not going to say a word on that subject until the situation clarifies, of course.
From what you know from the President's condition, that the Vice President will have to, for a period of time, take the role of acting President?
That's a fundamentally premature question, and I couldn't answer it. Thank you very much.
Is he under anesthesia?
That was Secretary of State Alexander Haig about an hour and a half ago speaking in the White House press room. And one of the issues that came up, as you heard, was the matter of a possible conspiracy. There is no information on that whatsoever, and the Secretary of State clearly, if he had any information, was not willing to discuss it. He said this is not the time to go into that. Another bit of information that's important is that we are told there has been no increase of alert of United States military forces, either in this country or around the world, given the nature of the emergency in which this country now is involved. I'm told that Chris Wallace is standing by at the auditorium of George Washington University Hospital. Chris, you there? Looking at the auditorium at the George Washington University Hospital. Chris Wallace is trying to get into position. I'm sure he will very, very shortly. This is something that has been whipped together within the last 2.5 hours in an effort, obviously, to provide a place where there can be official information provided in a quick fashion, a centralized authority, as it were, very close to the area where President Reagan is. To repeat, the President this afternoon underwent surgery for the removal, I presume, of a bullet shot into the left side of the chest with a report that it had pierced one lung. After 1 hour of surgery, doctors told Mrs. Reagan that the President's condition was good. The President's spokesman, James Brady, is in very serious condition, and all earlier reports that he had died are untrue, we are told by Lynn Nofziger. He has emphatically denied those reports. Ed Newman is in New York. Ed?
Marvin, a point we ought to make, perhaps unnecessary, we will stay on the air with this story for as long as it takes. I suppose that was obvious from the beginning. A story of this size, of course, that is what we do. But we are getting numerous telephone calls from around the country, people wanting to know whether we're going to go to our regular broadcasting schedule as evening comes on. We're staying with the story as long as we ought to, as long as the story warrants, and obviously that's going to be for a good long time, unfortunately. Now, we have had further conflicting reports, I'm afraid, about whether the surgery on President Reagan is emergency surgery or exploratory surgery. Both words are appearing in reports. We have had conflicting reports about whether the operation is over or whether it is still underway. As I was saying earlier, we don't know when it began. Although Marvin Kalb just said a moment ago it has been underway for an hour, but I think we were not given an official beginning time, and there's a good deal of information we still do not have. We presume that there are those on the White House staff who are doing their best to get this information for us. I suppose it might also be said that the physicians engaged in this case have many other things on their minds and perhaps don't want to take time out to talk to us. We were saying earlier that the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher sent a message saying to President Reagan saying she was very distressed and that she was praying for his recovery. The President of France, Giscard d'Estaing, has sent a telegram to President Reagan that said, "I wish to express to you my very warmest wishes for your complete recovery." President and Mrs. Nixon have said that they are, former President and Mrs. Nixon have said that they are praying for the President. That message from their daughter Tricia Nixon Cox here in New York. Back to you, Marvin.
We also want to point out that former President Carter and Mrs. Carter back in Plains, Georgia, have sent their best wishes to the President, hoping for his speediest possible recovery. We are told that this question that we were talking about a moment ago just bears repeating here. The Secretary of State, when he was asked the question about whether there is a conspiracy, clearly did not wish to address the issue. It could be that there is no conspiracy. We do not have information about that. We only know that when the question was asked, the Secretary of State did not wish to address it. We do know from Tom Pettit, I believe I'm correct, that Senator Howard Baker, who is the Senate Majority Leader, has been provided with Secret Service protection. Correct me, Tom Pettit, if I'm wrong on that, but it would indicate some concern about other major figures in the U.S. government. I understand at this point that Chris Wallace is at the auditorium at the George Washington University Hospital. Chris, are you there?
I am, Marvin. Let's...
We are obviously having trouble, and most unfortunately, hearing Chris Wallace's report. We do have the picture, we don't have the sound. We'll probably go back to Chris just as soon as we do have the sound. I wanted to pick up the point also that so far as we know, so far as we have been told, no United States military forces have been placed on any higher state of alert. We are told at this point that there is a single suspect. He is in police custody. His name is John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., 22 years old, from a small town, Evergreen, Colorado. We don't know if anybody else was involved. This is all of the information that we have been given up to this particular time. As Ed Newman pointed out a moment ago, there is still no clear word that we have gotten that the surgery on President Reagan is finished. We do not know exactly when the surgery began. And Ed, what I mentioned a moment ago was that an hour after the surgery began, I do not know when it began, the doctors pointed out to Mrs. Reagan, according to Lynn Nofziger, that the President's condition was good at that time. Lynn Nofziger, since that time, also described the President's condition as good. The last we heard about the condition of the White House presidential spokesman, James Brady, who was shot in the head, his condition was described as very serious indeed. Ed Newman?
Marvin, it is unfortunately the case, I suppose, that the longer the surgery goes on, and the longer that we're without information on it, the more serious the case will appear to be. This is no time to make assumptions, and certainly no time to make sad assumptions, unhappy assumptions, but that it is quite clear that the longer the surgery...
The Secret Service leave the Washington Hilton Hotel. A fusillade of shots fired at close range. The president is hit, then thrown into his car by an agent. His press secretary wounded in the head. A Secret Service man and a policeman wounded. A gunman captured.
This is NBC Nightly News. With John Chancellor in New York and Chief Washington Correspondent Roger Mudd.
Good evening. Here's the latest. The president is still in surgery. His condition is described as good, and the doctors are optimistic. He was able to walk into the hospital under his own power, even though a single assassin's bullet had entered his left side and penetrated his left lung. The presidential press secretary, James Brady, was shot in the head and is in extremely critical condition. The outlook is not good. Chris Wallace reports from the George Washington University Hospital.
The latest official word came at 6:06 p.m. Eastern Time from presidential spokesman Lynn Nofziger. He said the president's condition is good and that he will be out of surgery, quote, shortly, and that he has not undergone open heart surgery. The White House has provided almost no medical information this afternoon, but a radio reporter who sneaked into the hospital at around 3 o'clock talked with a staff doctor. He reported that according to this doctor, the bullet entered Mr. Reagan's left side and missed his heart by